Hey everybody, how is everybody doing? I hope you are staying warm. I hope you've got electricity. It's so good to be here with you all tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. So let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome everybody. I am so glad to be here with everyone tonight. Good to see you. And we're going to have yet another great late night conversation. We'll be following our usual format, which is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call, and I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. Then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, the best thing to do would be to send me a buy me a coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com, Caleb Maupin. That's the best way to do it. You can also send Rumble rants if you're on the Rumble, and you can also Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. That's another good way to do it. But the best way, buy me a coffee. And John has already done it. So his question will be first because he's already done it. Very, very good. But yeah, we're just going to follow our normal format. As far as announcements, mark your calendar for August 15th. That'll be the 1-year anniversary of Trump and Putin's summit in Alaska. And that's when we're having our national convention in Chicago. Be there. It's going to be great. If you're interested in getting involved with the CPI community, we're having our 7-day program, August 12th through 19th, around the time of the convention, a couple days before, a couple days after. That's a time to get to know members and all of that. Center for Political Innovation is growing and expanding, doing great work. I mean, our members were just out in LA confronting the Falun Gong and their anti-China hysterical propaganda. And they were in the streets yesterday. We're going to have reports about that video soon. That's going to be great. And, you know, our members are doing great work and great things are happening. We got some house parties coming up for the Ides of March, talking about the fall of Rome. And, you know, we're just spreading anti-imperialism everywhere we can. We went to the gates of the jail where Maduro is being held to say hands off Venezuela. We just had a great event in New York City and Newark that was really, really awesome. So yeah, Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. If you'd like to become a member, go to our website, CPI USA, and join, get involved. You can join on the website. Very exciting. We can plug you into activities. But yeah, tonight's stream will follow the normal format. First, the opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions. So if you have a question, buy me a coffee is the best way to send your question. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is Venezuela, right? Because as you all know, that obviously is an issue that we've touched on quite a bit on here. We maintain that the arrest of Nicolas Maduro is completely illegal. We look at the achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution in terms of wiping out illiteracy and providing modern housing. We look at Venezuela as an example of an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial revolution. We view the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro as completely illegitimate. And I've been to Venezuela, and I've got films on here. I have a film inside a Bolivarian commune about what life is like in one of the colectivos. I've been to Venezuela. I observed the 2015 elections. And I have a book about Venezuela, too. The Siege Has Failed, Why Venezuela Stands Strong Against Globalism, Imperialism. We have a record of standing with Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro even mentioned a CPI activity, a protest we had to support Alex Saab when he was kidnapped. He mentioned our protest in Times Square. He mentioned it in a speech, which was pretty cool. So, you know, we've been standing with Venezuela for quite some time. But I wanted to touch on Venezuela because this is really important. there's a new audio recording of the interim president who's, holding the seat of presidency while Nicolas Maduro is kidnapped and illegally held as a prisoner of war in New York City. There's a tape, an audio tape, it's been leaked, of Delcy Rodriguez, who is the vice president of Venezuela, explaining what happened. And I'm going to put this tape on just so you can see it. They made it, the USA basically told all of the top government officials in Venezuela that Maduro was dead. He was not dead. He was taken into custody. They forcibly kidnapped him, but they told them all that he was dead, and they would be dead too if they did not immediately cooperate. And Delcy Rodriguez is the interim president of Venezuela, and I have full confidence in her. And I would urge people to avoid making any claims. As far as it's looking, Venezuela maintains the Bolivarian revolution is fully intact, that they are fully committed to their revolution. Now the USA is making them new offers now that Maduro has been kidnapped, etc. But socialism in Venezuela is not being dismantled as of yet. And it's important that we don't spread any confusion and disinformation. So this is the audio tape that's been leaked of Delcy Rodriguez kind of explaining how Maduro was kidnapped.
Amenazas vinieron desde el primer minuto que ellos secuestraron al presidente. Nos dieron a Diosdado, a Jorge y a mí 15 minutos para responder, si no nos iban a matar. Y frente a la información que nos habían dicho que los habían asesinado, no que estaban secuestrados, nosotros dijimos, estamos listos a correr la misma suerte. Y se lo digo, esa afirmación la mantenemos al día de hoy, porque las amenazas son permanentes, los chantajes son permanentes, y nosotros tenemos que ir con paciencia y prudencia estratégica, con objetivos muy claros, hermanos y hermanas, objetivos claros. El primero de ellos es preservar la paz de la República. El segundo, nosotros tenemos que rescatar a nuestros rehenes. Alguien nos dijo, bueno, lo van a estar permanentemente chantajeando con el presidente y la primera combatiente. Y nosotros dijimos, ellos se declaran en combate allá y nosotros en combate acá. Pero eso no quiere decir que no somos cautelosos en cada paso que damos pensando en ellos. Cada paso que avanzamos o cada estrategia, nosotros la damos pensando en ellos. Y el tercer punto es preservar el poder político, porque la revolución bolivariana, si no está en el poder político, bueno, imagínense ustedes el destino de este país, el destino de este pueblo, de los más vulnerables, de los que durante décadas fueron excluidos del puntofijismo, puedan verse retorcidos en esta historia y traicionados. Así que esos son objetivos muy claros que nosotros como alto mando político nos habíamos trazado, escenario frente al cual el presidente nos fue preparando en caso de que él no estuviese. Bueno, ahí está su ejemplo, ahí está nuestro compromiso, nuestra lealtad y bueno, la prudencia y la paciencia estratégica para avanzar. Nosotros no estamos confrontando ni tenemos adversarios que puedan entenderse dentro de la racionalidad humana. Tenemos adversarios y enfrentamos una clase de personas, bueno, que está muy comprometida en su integridad moral, sobre todo. Y así como yo digo que la batalla militar es desigual, yo tengo que decir que nosotros tenemos una superioridad moral e histórica que nos inspira a la resistencia. Estamos en un momento de resistencia y esa resistencia tiene que ser una resistencia victoriosa. Nosotros tenemos que salir de acá fortalecidos en la unión, fortalecidos en la cohesión del país. Nosotros tenemos que sumar al país porque es una batalla que tiene que enfrentar, que tiene que dar Venezuela en su conjunto. Pero el núcleo y el motor es la revolución. Y así debe ser y tenemos que comprometernos a eso. Y nunca dudar que la dirección política está firmemente comprometida con esos objetivos que yo les mencioné y que a veces se dan pasos tácticos, que a veces puedan hacerse acciones poco comprensible, pero deben ustedes saber que así como el adversario, el enemigo, tiene una estrategia muy clara, nosotros también tenemos una estrategia.
Yeah. Now, what we need to talk about here, right, is that I've seen a lot of people claiming that Dulce Rodriguez was somehow in on the kidnapping of Maduro, that Venezuela's revolution has been overturned. And people need to cut that shit out. They really do. It's not helpful, right? Now, if that is actually the case, which I doubt that that's the case, but if that is the case, we'll know, right? Revolutions don't get overturned and nobody notices, right? The change from a planned economy to the domination by imperialism is something that you don't miss. You don't blink and miss it. When the Soviet Union fell, that was a really big deal. And everyone saw the Soviet Union fall. And everyone saw the very, very dramatic results of that. And in every Eastern European country, when they had a counter-revolution and the imperialists re-seized control of the country, you saw the results, okay? It appears that what happened was the USA ruthlessly kidnapped Nicolas Maduro and threatened the other leaders of the country. And the USA is trying to put pressure on the leaders of the country, but it's also trying to make offers, right? There's talk of more Venezuelan oil being sold to the United States. The CIA director was just down there to have diplomatic talks. But if indeed Venezuela's revolution is somehow being overturned, we'll know. We'll know because it'll be very clear in that the economic foundations of the country will start to be taken apart. And there will be anger on the part of the population, and we'll see it. And that's not happening right now. And that this is something that I have seen over and over and over again, which is there's a change in the leadership of an anti-imperialist country. Something happens. In this case, it's a ruthless kidnapping. That the Venezuelan people have been in the streets loudly condemning, and the interim president, former vice president, has been loudly condemning as well. There's been a dramatic moment, and then a whole bunch of people announce, oh, the revolution's over, it's all overturned. And the problem with doing that is that you are actively aiding the imperialists, because what is going on right now is they're trying to divide the leadership of Venezuela. They kidnapped the head of state, and they're trying to create confusion. And the last thing that Venezuela needs from us in its struggle against imperialism is us sowing rumors and confusion. If somehow Dulce Rodriguez is collaborating with the United States, is going to dismantle socialism and anti-imperialism in Venezuela, we'll know. We'll know. That'll be clear. It's not happening as of yet. And, I have seen this over and over and over again. For example, a few years ago, I don't know if you remembered, in Zimbabwe, right? Zimbabwe is a country that had an anti-colonial revolution. Robert Mugabe was the leader of the anti-colonial revolution, and he made a deal. He fought a civil war against the British, basically, the Rhodesian Bush War. Rhodesia was the apartheid government. He waged an armed struggle, the Rhodesian Bush War, and he overthrew Rhodesia. He established Zimbabwe, and he signed an agreement, the Lancaster House Agreement, with the British Empire and with the apartheid forces, that he wouldn't nationalize any property after the revolution in Zimbabwe, that for 10 years they would not nationalize any property. Well, the 10 years was up, and in the 90s, they started nationalizing the land of Zimbabwe. They started a land reform program. And at that point, the USA put all kinds of sanctions on Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was declared to be a brutal dictatorship, even though Mugabe was overwhelmingly popular with the black majority. And he was the symbol of the revolution against the apartheid government. And Robert Mugabe was very popular. He was very anti-gay. He didn't believe in LGBT stuff as a traditional African conservative. He's an anti-imperialist, but he was anti-LGBT. So we were constantly hearing that, oh, gay people are being persecuted in Zimbabwe. It was a whole crazy thing. Anyway, Robert Mugabe got old. He was in his 80s, right? He'd been the leader of the revolution, and he was going to die. And he wanted his wife to be the leader of the country after he died. And the rest of the ruling party of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriot Front, ZANU-PF, which is the ruling party of Zimbabwe, they all said, no, you can't do that. No, your wife is not going to be the leader after you die. And there was kind of I don't know what you want to call it. They basically, Robert Mugabe retired. And he wanted to retire and put his wife in charge and the rest of the ruling party, because these countries are democratic, right? They always describe these countries as just total dictatorships. No, they're not. And the ruling party, the rest of the ruling party and the military said, no, you're not going to put your wife in charge. And so Robert Mugabe was forced into retirement, and another leader of the Zimbabwe military, a guy who was part of the anti-colonial, war against the Rhodesians, took power. Now, at the time that happened, mainstream U.S. media was playing up the idea that, Mugabe is being overthrown. He's being overthrown, and this is the overthrow of the brutal Zimbabwe regime. And that wasn't the case. There was just a disagreement within the ruling party. And I saw many, many people who supported Mugabe, calling it a coup, a CIA coup, and a counter-revolution. It wasn't that. It wasn't that at all. And Zimbabwe still to this day is an anti-imperialist country. They've nationalized the diamond mines. They're trading with China. Zimbabwe is an anti-imperialist country. That is, the land reform program has continued. They're redistributing the land. There was just a disagreement within the ruling party. And it was not helpful that at the time there was this confusion going on as Robert Mugabe was kind of being forced into retirement. There were a lot of people spreading disinformation, and that helps the imperialists because they want to use anything they can to create confusion, right? At the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, mainstream media amplified like crazy the notion that there were the hardliners in the ruling party and the moderates in the ruling party, right? And they played up this idea, the Soviet communists are divided, and there were divisions within the Soviet party, but they played up those divisions very, very loudly. And that when a country is under threat, right, part of the way the USA does it is it confuses, not only does it demonize the country, but then it confuses the people that support it. If you support Venezuela, don't go around saying that there's been a counter-revolution. Their leader has been kidnapped. The people that are in power right now support Maduro, want him to be returned, and are trying to hold the country together. And they're receiving constant threats from the United States, and they're trying to negotiate with the United States in the context of their leader being kidnapped. If indeed there is a counter-revolution, well, no, it'll be very, very clear. It'll be clear. You don't miss a counter-revolution. A counter-revolution, and this is part of the confusion. People, a lot of these ultra-Maoists think the Soviet Union became capitalist after Stalin died. Well, no, there was a change in leadership, but the fall of the Soviet Union didn't happen until the 90s. There was no change. A counter-revolution, the transition from a planned socialist, anti-imperialist economy to being under the domination of Western imperialism is very, very hard to miss. It's not something you blink and miss. It's not subtle. You'll know. And the last thing Venezuela needs is people announcing that there's been a counter-revolution, sowing confusion, trying to play up the idea that the interim president who's demanding that Maduro be returned while trying to negotiate with the United States, that she's actually a U.S. agent and all of this. It's a really big problem. Right? It's a really big problem. Dulce Rodriguez has amazing credentials as an anti-imperialist. Her father was a hero of the socialist movement in Venezuela who was killed. It was disappeared by the military dictatorship. She has spent her life as an activist in socialist and anti-imperialist and labor politics. I really doubt that she would, completely sell out the revolution. The USA did something pretty ruthless and kidnapped the president of Venezuela. It looks like the USA used some new technology to carry it out. Some more of the details of how the ruthless kidnapping that killed hundreds of Venezuelan civilians, some more details about how that's happening are coming out. And this whole event is shrouded in disinformation. And that's one thing I would really urge people to do, not just this event, but every event. Think about what you are saying. Right at the time that Venezuela was attacked, all over social media, they had clips of Venezuelans celebrating, and some of these clips were from Venezuelans celebrating the World Cup and their team winning soccer, and some of these clips were Venezuelans in exile in Spain or in other countries. But it was all over the Trumper media. All the Venezuelans are just out in the streets cheering that Maduro's been removed. That didn't happen, right? There were Venezuelans in Miami who were cheering, and there were Venezuelans who cheered for the World Cup, and there were, there were anti-Maduro Venezuelans in other parts of the world that were celebrating, but there was not huge celebration on the streets. But that was just blasted everywhere. It just had to be true. And so many of these videos were proven to be fakes. Meanwhile, they've been having almost daily pro-Maduro rallies since he's been taken, where the people of Venezuela have been marching in the streets saying, bring back our president, bring back our leader. And all the Trumpers and all the mainstream media outlets are looking the other way. That shows you how important disinformation and confusion is, right? And that spreading the idea that there's a division, that a section of the Bolivarian government is sold out and is working for the United States, that's not true. And if it were to be true, we'll know, right? You don't miss a counter-revolution. You don't blink and miss a counter-revolution. The change in property relations, right, where the economy of a country goes from being centrally planned and directed by an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial state to being under the domination of imperialism, it's very hard to miss. It's very, very, very hard to miss, right? And Venezuela has been a stronghold of anti-imperialism. Its military is trained in Cuba. Like, if a section of the Venezuelan government were to be under the domination of the United States, there would be another big section of the Venezuelan government that would be fighting them very loudly. And you can't miss a counter-revolution. And it's really, really important that people don't fall into the trap of spreading rumor and confusion. You shouldn't do that, right? Don't say things that are not helpful unless you know that they are true. And there's way, way too much of a desire to predict negative things. And I have seen this endlessly. For example, the USA has attacked Iran under Trump's leadership. I think that's horrible. And the USA was recently threatening to attack Iran again and didn't. I saw all kinds of people in the lead up to that say, oh, Iran's government is going to be overthrown. They're done. They're finished. If you support Iran and you don't want that to happen, why would you announce that it's going to happen, right? How are you helping anybody by announcing that something bad is going to happen when it hasn't happened, right? Now, it looked like the USA was going to attack Iran, but it looks like the USA backed away from it. Now, they still might attack Iran. They might, right? We don't know, but don't announce that it's going to happen. Like, I don't understand. I feel like a lot of people think they get points, right, for being right? Like if they predicted something, they could say, oh, I said the USA was going to attack Iran and they did, so I'm right. Well, what points are you going to get for that? Don't go around announcing bad news, announcing negative things until they actually happen, right? Because if you do that, right, that demoralizes the Iranian people, right? All the people in the United States that support them are already announcing they're going to be attacked. Oh, it's going to happen. That's not helpful, right? What you should be saying is not the USA is going to attack Iran. Oh, blah, blah, blah. You should be saying the USA shouldn't attack Iran. Hands off Iran. Iran has the ability to defend itself. You should be saying things that are true about what's actually happening, not what you think might happen. And second, about, standing up for what's right, not predicting bad things. And that our anti-imperialists, I just see an endless amount of predicting bad things. Peace talks when it comes to Russia. Hasn't happened yet. But shouldn't we be pushing for it to happen? Yes. Yes, we should be pushing for it to happen, right? As people living in the center of U.S. imperialism, as people are dying on the battlefield in Ukraine every day, we should be calling for an end to this conflict. And I have had people say, oh, there will never be a peace deal in Ukraine. Trump is a fraud and all. Yeah, Trump is, very disappointing, very self-interested. I don't think there's much sincerity on the part of Trump at this point. I'm not going to defend Trump, but if we can get a peace deal, we should be pushing for that. We should be demanding that a peace deal happen. And if you say there's never going to be one, how are you helping anybody? We should be demanding one. Whether it actually happens or not, we should be pushing for what's right. And I've seen people, people that are anti-imperialists say Russia shouldn't negotiate with the United States. Russia shouldn't negotiate. They should fight until the end and all of this. And there are people in Russia who feel that way, right? There are people in Russia that do take that position. However, we're not in Russia. We're not here to tell Russia what to do. Russia is under attack from U.S. imperialism, okay? And they are negotiating to try and end that attack and get an end to the conflict. We should be supporting them, not telling them what to do in order to feel ultra revolutionary. If I was in Russia, that's a different thing. If I was in Russia, if Russia was my country, if I was a Russian and not an American, maybe I would have the right to say, I don't think they should negotiate, or I do think they should negotiate, or whatever. But I'm not. I'm an American. I'm living in the center of the empire, and I'm trying to push against imperialism. And I'm trying to make the case to the American people that we need to break our country out of imperialism too, and that Russia is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. Cuba and Venezuela and Iran are not our enemy. And so if I see the USA negotiating to potentially end a bloodbath created by NATO in Ukraine, I am going to loudly support those negotiations. I'm not going to oppose them on the grounds of being ultra revolutionary. It doesn't help. It does not help. And that I see a lot of very irresponsible behavior from anti-imperialists. And this Venezuela thing is a great example of that, right? That, we don't know. You don't know that. You can say, oh, Dulce sold out Maduro. How do you know? What makes you say that? She's mobilizing the people of Venezuela to demand that he be returned. She hasn't taken the presidency for herself. She's only the interim president, right? You don't know that. Is it possible that happened? Sure. I mean, anything's possible, but you don't know that. And spreading that claim hurts Venezuela, because Venezuela is trying to hold the country together right now in the face of a brutal crime, their head of state being kidnapped. And so spreading the unproven speculation that casts doubt on the woman who is now leading the country as the interim president, when they are saying no such thing happened, and they are trying to hold the anti-colonial government together, it's not helpful, right? And that there's way too much of this. There's way too much of this. Again, if there's a counter-revolution in Venezuela, we will know. When the Soviet Union fell, we knew. When Yugoslavia was dismantled, we knew, right? When the Eastern Bloc was dismantled, we knew. When Gaddafi's Libya was destroyed, we knew. When a country is reconquered by the imperialists, there is no doubt, there is no confusion. It's very clear, okay? Right? It's a question of property, right? It's a question of property, right? Are the banks, factories, and industries of the country operating to serve public good as part of an anti-colonial revolution, or are they operating under the domination of Western imperialists? And it's very clear when huge banks and huge natural resources, Venezuela's got the biggest oil resources in the world, when things like that change hands, there's never any question about it, okay? And we need to get beyond, counter-revolution is not words, all right? This is active property. So that was the first thing I wanted to say, right? Please stop spreading rumors and innuendo about Venezuela. At this point, we don't know what will happen next, and if anything happens, we will know. But if there's a counter-revolution in Venezuela, we will know. It will be clear, right? And until that happens, don't say it, right? And it's not helpful, and spreading rumors is not helpful. Now, the next thing I wanted to point out, I wanted to talk about Iran for quite a bit of time, because, I mean, obviously, I've been to Iran a number of times. I actually made a film about Iran. You can visit the CPI website. If you go to films, you can actually watch the film I made in Iran, Iranian Dream, in 2015, where I talked about witnessing a speech by the supreme leader. And I've been to Iran. I've studied Iran. And there's been a lot of interesting stuff about Iran recently. So the USA was threatening to attack Iran. And part of what the United States did was foment unrest in Iran, right? There was a number of people that were aligned with the United States that went out and rioted. And so Iran declared a state of emergency and shut down those riots. And now things in Iran are pretty safe and stable. The USA was threatening to attack them and backed away from it at the last minute. Hopefully they don't attack. Now, what happened was basically the United States called up all their proxies in Iran, the people that, they admire the Shah, the monarchists, the Pahlavists. They called up the pro-Israel people aligned with the Mujahideen Khalq, which is an Islamic terrorist group, and basically just told all those people to just go out in the streets. And those people went out in the streets and they killed 3,000 police officers. It appears 3,000 police officers. Whole buildings were burned. It was an episode of violence. And during that episode of violence, Donald Trump said, oh, if they kill any protester, I'm going to attack, right? If they kill any protester, if a single protester is killed, I'm going to attack. Well, these weren't protests. This was violent attempts at regime change. Trump was urging the protesters to take over government buildings, etc. And Trump's whole thing was, oh, you can't harm any protesters. But then what happened? I mean, it looks like protesters have been harmed in Minneapolis now, haven't they? I mean, have you seen the details that are coming out regarding what happened with Alex Preddy, Renee Good? It gets even crazier, right? This is an actual video. And I don't know if people have seen this. This is a police department in Florida that actually had a press conference. And they just, here you go. I mean, this is what they said. This is an actual video from an American police department. Not even the federal police. This is a local police department in Florida saying what, basically laying out their policy.
Resist lawful orders, you're going to jail. Let me be very clear about that. If you block an intersection or a roadway in Brevard County, you are going to jail. If you flee arrest, you're going to go to jail tired, because we are going to run you down and put you in jail. If you try to mob rule a car in Brevard County, gathering around it, refusing to let the driver leave, in our county, you're most likely going to get run over and dragged across the street. If you spit on us, you're going to the hospital and in jail. If you hit one of us, you're going to the hospital and jail, and most likely get bitten by one of our big, beautiful dogs that we have here. If you throw a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you graveyard dead.
You heard that. If you throw a brick, or a firebomb, or you point a gun at one of our officers, we will kill you graveyard dead. So do you think anybody threw any bricks in Iran? Right? I mean, so we have American police not just doing it, right? I mean, and there's been plenty of examples of protesters getting shot at protests. But we have American police announcing that it is their policy. If you throw a brick, we will kill you. And then Trump was saying, oh, if any protester in Iran is harmed, and you look at what they did in Iran, torching entire buildings. I mean, it was an episode of violent unrest in which thousands of Iranian police and security personnel were killed. And then Trump says, oh, if any of these protesters are harmed, he's attacking. I mean, the level of hypocrisy there is just astounding, right? I mean, we have the situation where this guy, Alex Preddy, now more details are coming out about the thing. And please do not, I said last night, I do not support ICE and what they're doing, right? I mean, and it looks just like with the case of Renee Good. I really don't buy the idea that Renee Good, was endangering the lives of ICE officers. She was driving and harassing them, and it looks like they surrounded her car and then they just killed her. Like they shot her, right? Now, this case, right, the more you look at the details and the different angles, it appears that first of all, the first version of events that we got was that he approached the ICE officers. Now it appears that's not the case. They approached him, right? That he was in the middle of the street, he was shouting, and they went up to him, right? And then there was a woman with a backpack, that was kind of scuffling, and then he intervened, and then they started scuffling with him. And he did have a gun on him, right? He did have his gun, and he did have a permit to carry a gun, but he had a gun and a lot of bullets on him at the time. And it appears they took the gun away from him. And then you hear a whole bunch of bullets ringing out. And, they didn't just shoot him once. They unloaded on him, right? I mean, you see it was 10 different shots, right? He was already on the ground shot, and they continued shooting at him. On top of that, the other detail of the situation is it appears that his gun had been apprehended prior to them shooting him. He was not armed at the time that he was killed. Now, one video clip is floating around claiming that what happened is they took his gun away and it went off, and they had the gun in a hand and it went off, and that confused other officers and they started shooting. They thought he was shooting at them because the officer had taken the gun accidentally the gun went off when he confiscated it. Some people, and it's not clear, there's other angles of the video where they say it looks like his gun was still on him at the time the shots were happening. But, this is a pretty crazy case, and he was a law-abiding gun owner, right? He was allowed to carry his gun. There's no evidence of him holding his gun up or threatening the officers with his gun. He just had his gun on him. But I guess, if Iran does anything to a single protester, then we have to bomb them. I mean, this is particularly crazy. Now, I wanted to talk about Iran because, it's interesting, right? I pay attention to the left and all of that. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is an anti-imperialist country. They overthrew the U.S.-backed dictator, the Shah. Khomeini, the cleric, the Islamic Shia Muslim cleric who was in exile, he became the leader of the revolution. He announced they believe in not capitalism, but Islam, war of poverty against wealth, neither East nor West. And they have a largely state-run economy, and they had an anti-colonial revolution. Iran is a stronghold of anti-imperialism. Now, is Iran perfect? No. Right. And especially since the 1990s, there's been a lot of market liberalizations. The gap between the rich and poor in Iran has expanded. But largely, Iran is not a capitalist country. It's not capitalism, but Islam. They have state-controlled natural resources. It's a very large amount of state ownership in addition to their market sector. They provide healthcare and education to the population. They have Basij councils that enforce the goals of the revolution on a local level. It's an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial country. At the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, they made very, very clear they were not a communist or Marxist country, right? Khomeini was very, very opposed to communism because he was a Shia Muslim, because he was a conservative, right? He was a conservative critic of the Shah. And at the very beginning of the Islamic Revolution, they made very, very clear they were not a Marxist country. But because Iran is conservative and because their anti-imperialism is expressed in the name of Shia Islam, there are a lot of leftists that take the Trump position on Iran. One of them is Cornel West. Dr. Cornel West, his wife, is an Iranian exile, a wealthy Iranian woman who fled from the Islamic Republic. And so Cornel West was cheering for these riots that were sponsored by the United States against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Communist Party of Britain, and this is very interesting, the CPB, the Communist Party of Britain, was cheering for the riots against the Islamic Republic. Now, this is important, and it's interesting to note. So in Britain, just like America, you have a million different communist groups, right? The communist group that I have the most respect for is the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, led by Jyoti Brar. Her late father, Harpal Brar, was somebody I learned a huge amount from. Jyoti has spoken at CPI conferences before. Obviously, we don't see eye to eye on a number of things. She's very much a Marxist-Leninist and is sticking with that view. We have transcended to a new stage of innovationism, and but largely they are solidly anti-imperialist. That's the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, the CPGB-ML. Right now, in Britain, there was the official Communist Party of Great Britain, the CPGB. They were the official Soviet-aligned Communist Party. They followed the Soviet Union. When Khrushchev gave his secret speech, they embraced Khrushchev and his secret speech. In the 70s and 80s, they became very divided between two factions. They called the Tankies and the Euros. The Tankies were the ones that followed the Soviet line. And that's where the term tanky comes from. It's kind of a slur. If you support Soviet foreign policy is described as tanks, Soviet tanks rolling in. So you're a tanky. And I've always been a tanky, right? If you take anti-imperialist positions, that means you're supporting those Soviet tanks. So you're a tanky. And then there were the Euro communists that in 1978, the Italian Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party, and the French Communist Party cut ties with Moscow, and they were called Euro communists. And that some people in the British Communist Party were supporting Euro communism. Some were taking pro-Soviet positions. Now, the Communist Party of Great Britain, the CPGB, liquidated at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. They basically threw in the towel. And they put out a statement as they dissolved. And their statement said that they believed that the Russian Revolution was a mistake of historic proportions. That basically they believed that the Bolsheviks should have just participated in a constituent assembly. They shouldn't have established the Soviet Union. And then they liquidated. Now, there are a number of groups in Britain that try to claim the heritage of the CPGB that dissolved in 1991 or 1992, right? A couple of those groups have different names, but the CPB is one of the groups. It's probably the biggest group that tries to maintain the legacy. And they completely supported the violent riots in Iran against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, Jyoti Brar's group, the CPGBML, did not support them. And there were a variety of other groups, but the CPB took a pretty reprehensible stance, as did Cornel West. And it's important to pay attention to various things. For example, one of the most common claims that will be made by Western leftists that are taking the position of supporting the violent overthrow of the Islamic Republic is they will say that the Islamic Republic of Iran persecuted and killed communists, which is true. And then they will often point to the Communist Party of Iran, statements from the Tudeh Party of Iran, right? The Communist Party of Iran was called the Tudeh Party. That was just what it was called. I think that means like peoples or workers or something like that. What does it literally mean? What does Tudeh literally mean? What does it literally mean? It's a Farsi word. It means the masses. Means the masses of people. The masses party, right, is what it was called. But it was the Communist Party of Iran. It was called the Mass Party of Iran. It was the Soviet-aligned political party, and it was at the time. It was a political party that was illegal under the Shah. But existed in secret, and it ran a lot of labor unions, and it was one of the parties. There was, we'll get into that in a second, but regardless, there are a number of Iranians who fled Iran in the early 80s who call themselves communists and the Tudeh Party, and they put out a lot of statements condemning the Islamic Republic. They don't represent people actually on the ground in Iran. They represent people who fled Iran in the early 1980s. There are Marxists in Iran, and we'll talk about all of this, right? It's a complicated thing. But at the time that Iran had its revolution, what happened was the Shah, the US-backed dictator, was the Shah, and he was very unpopular. There was an oil workers' strike, and one thing led to another, and some protesters were killed, so the Shah declared a national day, like a national holiday for mourning, and that encouraged people to go out and protest, and things escalated. And then Khomeini returned to Iran, and the military of Iran swore allegiance to Khomeini, and the Islamic Republic was declared. Iran had a revolution, and Khomeini, who was a popular Shia Muslim cleric who had fled the country, he had fled the country because he was actually a conservative critic of the Shah. At the time, he thought that the Shah was too modern, but then in exile, his views had kind of shifted. He kind of began to fit Shia Islam in with anti-colonial movements, and he began denouncing capitalism, not capitalism, but Islam. He was never a Marxist, though, and he made clear he was not a Marxist. He was not interested in combining Marxism with Islam or whatever. But he was a very, very popular religious cleric who people would smuggle audio tapes of him back. And he was just kind of a well-known cleric in Iran. He returned to the country and they formed the Islamic Republic. Okay. Now, it wasn't clear at the time that the revolution was over, right? There were a lot of communists in Iran at the time. And then what happened? Iraq invaded Iran, and Iraq was a leftist government. It was led by Saddam Hussein, who was a Ba'athist Arab socialist. And so the Islamic Republic had to kind of mobilize the population to fight off the Iraqi invaders. And in that context, there was a big crackdown on the communist parties because the Soviet Union had supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran. And there was a feeling that the communists were on the wrong side as Iraq was invading them, and so there was a heavy crackdown on communists. Now, at the time of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, there were three major communist groups in Iran. The Tudeh Party, the Masses Party, that was the major political party that was in Iranian cities and had organized labor unions, right? And they were the Soviet-aligned party. And then you had another group called the Fedayeen, the People's Fedayeen Guerrillas, and they were trying to organize people's war, like peasant guerrilla warfare in the countryside of Iran. And they've been doing that for several years. They didn't really have much support, but they were more radical, I guess you could say, than the Tudeh Party. They were trying to organize like a Guevara or a Maoist guerrilla war. And then there was another group that was very big, like a third communist faction that was called the Mujahideen Khalq, or the People's Holy Warriors, right? Mujahideen means holy warrior. It's the Islamic term for like one who fights in the name of God or whatever. The Mujahideen, the People's Mujahideen, they were called. The People's Mujahideen, they combined Islam and Marxism. And they followed Masoud Rajavi, who was an Iranian guy who claimed to be the combined reincarnation of Jesus Christ and Vladimir Lenin in one body. And that he was sent to Earth to usher in a global Islamic communist revolution. And the Mujahideen Khalq, they were left adventurists. They kidnapped a number of Americans and killed them. They did suicide bombings. They were just this kind of very extreme, radical, communist, Muslim, fanatical sect that was known to do kidnappings and bombings and assassinations in the 1970s. And after Khomeini took power, they at first were supportive because they were Muslims. But when Khomeini fired, when Khomeini fired a cleric, there was a cleric who was part of Khomeini's government that was very like Marxist and sympathetic. When Khomeini fired him, they went on a killing spree and they blew up the Iranian parliament and they killed 81 members of the parliament. Can you imagine that? Like somebody attacking, the U.S. Capitol and killing 81 members of Congress. I mean, it was crazy. The current Supreme Leader Khamenei, he can't move one of his arms. One of his arms is paralyzed because they blew up one of his press conferences. They bombed his press conference. And Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, they just went on a ruthless killing spree. Just a ruthless killing spree after the Islamic Revolution. It was like a level of violence, bombings, assassinations, etc. And it was in that context that a lot of the crackdown on communists, that they officially outlawed the communist parties in Iran, etc. Now, what's crazy is when Iraq invaded Iran, the Mujahideen Khalq sided with Iraq, and they called it the Iranian National Liberation Army. And Iraq airdropped them into Iran, and they slaughtered entire villages and committed atrocities. And then they fled to Iraq, and they had a city in Iraq that they controlled. And Saddam Hussein used them in Iraq as a military. They were basically an armed group that Saddam Hussein used in Iraq. And after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, they were recruited by the United States and by Israel. And it's particularly wild. They moved them to Albania. They operate out of Albania and France. In France, they have a big compound. And the leader of the group, Masoud Rajavi, has not been seen since the USA invaded Iraq. Many people believe he was killed when the USA invaded Iraq. That's not confirmed. But his wife, Miriam Rajavi, lives in France. She claims she's the president of Iran in exile. She's the president of Iran. She claims she's the legitimate president of Iran. And she lives in France. And there's a couple other people that live in Albania. There's like a compound in Albania. And they work for Israel. And they actually assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists for Israel. And they run intelligence inside of Iran for Israel. The Mujahideen Khalq, they're called, MEK. They were legally designated by the U.S. government as a terrorist organization until Hillary Clinton delisted them. Right after Obama took office, Hillary Clinton delisted them. And so they're no longer designated as a terrorist group. And what they always say, and this is particularly wild, is they always say they renounced violence. And that is so obviously not true. I don't know where people get that, but if you ever bring that up and you say, Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, they're a terrorist group, and they say, oh, they renounced violence. They haven't renounced violence. They murdered Iranian nuclear scientists. That's pretty violent. I was in Iran. I saw the graves of the Iranian nuclear scientists that they killed. In addition to that, the group looks like they were involved in the violence that just happened in Iran. They were all over Iran, shooting from buildings and all that. They have not renounced violence. They are a very violent organization, the Mujahideen Khalq. And that's one of the communist groups from Iran that that has just, at this point, they've just turned into Mossad operatives. Every year, when Iran speaks before the United Nations, they have a protest out in front of the UN. And what's wild, and I've written about this before, is that this group, they are Muslim communists. That's what they are officially calling themselves. Muslim communists. They worship Masoud Rajavi. But yet, who speaks at their rally? Right? Who speaks at their rally? Mayor Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani, and all the Republicans line up to speak at this rally by this Muslim communist group that works for Israel. I mean, it's particularly crazy. So that organization, Mujahideen Khalq, is a terrorist group. They run a network of terrorists across Iran that kidnap people and murder people and do intelligence work for Israel. You can understand why they're illegal. Now, when the Islamic Revolution of Iran happened, the Tudeh party was outlawed because it was a Marxist-Leninist political party that would not be respecting the Islamic constitution because Marxism is atheistic, etc. So what they did is they dissolved and they dissolved the party, from what I understand, and they created Islamic organizations that continued their vision. Right. And I believe there was a youth group called the Students Taking Imam's Line. Right. I think the young communists or the youth group of the party, they became Students Taking the Imam's Line. And they were heavily involved in the embassy kidnapping, or the embassy, taking the U.S. embassy. And that there were a number of groups, and even in Iran today, there's something called the Islamic Labor Party, which is, they're not communist because you can't have a communist party in Iran, but they're a political party that represents the labor unions, that is against capitalism, that, wants better relations with Cuba and China and stuff, and they're in the government. And there's a number of different things like that in Iran. There's a building in Iran called the House of Latin America. And it's a building that facilitates Iran's relationships with Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua and countries like that. And I've been to Iran and I've met a lot of Iranians that have a Marxist perspective and support the Islamic Republic against imperialism. They see the Islamic Republic as a stronghold against imperialism. And that it's interesting. So in the early 80s, Iran, there was kind of a crackdown on communists because they were being invaded by Iraq. They were in a state of war. And then in the late 80s, Iran pivoted into the U.S. camp. In the late 80s and in the 90s, Iraq was the main enemy of the United States in the Middle East, and Iran kind of pivoted into the U.S. camp. And they executed a lot of communist prisoners in the 1980s. And then in the 90s, Iran was very, very pro-America, very pro-Western, because Iraq was their main threat. And they had a lot of market reforms, and they had a lot of leaders in office that positioned, Iran to be more pro-Western. There were still incidents that happened, like there was an airplane that was shot down. The U.S. government shot down and killed an Iranian civilian airplane. And refused to apologize. George Herbert Walker Bush refused to apologize for shooting down an Iranian civilian airplane, just as a nasty, attack on Iran. But then what happened was that Ahmadinejad became president. So after 9/11, right, Iran was actually very sympathetic to the United States after 9/11. There were like rallies supporting the United States, opposing terrorism, etc. But Bush named Iran as part of the axis of evil. And when that happened, Iran was threatened, obviously. And then on top of that, the oil prices shot up. When the USA invaded Iraq, which is right next to Iran, a major oil producing country, was blown to bits, the oil prices went through the roof. And the oil revenue is the basis of the state sector of the Iranian economy. And the state sector funds the universities that teach the hardliner political stances. It funds the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. So there was, Iran was threatened by the United States, called one of the axes of evil. And then on top of that, the amount of oil revenue coming into the section of the Islamic Revolution that is more hardline and anti-imperialist increased. And so Ahmadinejad was elected president of Iran. And Ahmadinejad's presidency was very much a turning point. Ahmadinejad was basically, like, people said he was like an Iranian Hugo Chavez. That he denounced capitalism very loudly. He met with Fidel Castro. He said Fidel Castro was a great Muslim. And he really amped up the social programs and emphasized the anti-imperialist goals of the Islamic Revolution. He was a hardliner. And what was interesting about Ahmadinejad was that he was a hardliner, but he wasn't a cleric, right? He was a hardliner who was not a cleric, right? I sat down with Ibrahim Rayazi, who was a hardliner, and he was a cleric. He was a judge and a cleric, an Islamic cleric, who became the president. He was a hardliner. Ahmadinejad, you'll notice he didn't have a beard. And he was a hardliner. His party was called the Alliance of Builders. And his background, he had been a Marxist at the time of the Islamic Revolution. He had converted to Islam afterwards, but he was never a cleric. And he was an architect, I believe, by his job, by trade, an architect or an engineer. He's now a philosophy professor in Iran after leaving the presidency. But he was very much a hardliner, but not from the cleric, not from the religious training. So when he came into office, there was a wave of Iranian communists who went home. That basically they got the memo. It was safe to go home. And the House of Latin America was created, and Iran escalated its support for Hezbollah, and Iran's relationship with Venezuela increased, and that Iran very much, was kind of pushed in a more and more anti-imperialist direction by the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And all of this is very, very interesting. But basically what I'm telling you is that you'll talk to Western leftists, right? Communists who don't like the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they will claim things about Iran's history that are much more nuanced and complicated. Things that are, pretty bad. There was heavy repression of Iranian communists immediately after the Islamic Revolution. But that was the context of Mujahideen Khalq blowing up the building, Iraq invading the country. And in the late 80s and early 90s, and in the 90s, Iran very much pivoted into the U.S. camp and was so it's complicated. But Iran at this point is a very, very solidly anti-imperialist country. There is no question about it. And that, yes, there are things in Iran that need reform. But a lot of things that people think about Iran are just not true. For example, one of the claims that they always throw out is that these protests in Iran are being led by the women. The women of Iran are oppressed, and it's the women that are fighting for their freedom. That's not the case. Okay. Now, there are things about Iran where I guess you could argue women's rights are not respected in the way that they're respected in the West, but there are more women in the parliament of Iran than there are in the U.S. Congress, for example. There are women in Iran that are generals in the military. We don't have that here. There are no women generals in the U.S. Army that I'm aware of. There are women generals. Women in Iran drive cars, which they didn't used to do in Saudi Arabia until pretty recently. Women in Iran vote. Women in Iran, there are more women in the university system in Iran than there are in America. In fact, the university system of Iran is overwhelmingly women. It's complicated. Now, there are things like under the Islamic legal system, the testimony of a woman in court doesn't count as much as a man's does. Okay, that's unfair. That's wrong. Things like that. So there are things that could be criticized about Iran, but this idea that, that Iran, it's the women that are leading this revolt and all of that, that's just not the case, right? There is very much a feeling that they don't they don't want women to be scantily clad, and that's cultural, right? And that, women wear a headscarf when they're out. That's cultural. That's Islamic. Obviously, they're, when it comes to billboards and, television and things like that, they're much more socially conservative. I hear crazy things like, there's a lot of things people think about Iran that are not true. Like they claim music is illegal in Iran. That's not the case, right? There's people are listening. They have like a radio station in Tehran that plays Pink Floyd 24 hours a day. There's all kinds of music in Iran, and it doesn't have to be religious music, and I don't know. There's just things like that. So, there is a level of social conservatism and a level of kind of traditional culture. But we hear so many things about Iran that are not true. Iran needs reform just like any other country, right? They're a developing country. The level of free speech that Iran has is nowhere near the level that we have in the West. And that's because they're under attack and they're suppressed. Iran uses the death penalty, pretty liberally. If you try to bring drugs into Iran, they will kill you. If you work with one of these terrorist groups like Mujahideen Khalq or whatever, they will kill you. So it's complicated, but a lot of times I hear Marxists and Western leftists, they talk to somebody, and there are a lot of Iranian communists who fled Iran in the 70s or in the early 80s, and they have an understanding of how the country is that is very, very simplistic. So I just wanted to share that, with regards to Iran. Now, I just got a couple other things I wanted to talk about. If you do have something you'd like me to touch on in the second half of the show, please buy me a coffee. That's the best way to get my attention for a question in the second half of the show. Buy me a coffee is the best way to do it. You can also cash at me at CalebMoppin22, or you can send a Rumble rant if you're watching on the Rumble. But, questions are always appreciated. You all make the second half of the show happen. So Michael Parenti, the writer, he just died recently. And Michael Parenti is somebody I've learned a lot from. I will say the book of his that I got the most out of was his book on the assassination of Julius Caesar. This book is very, very amazing, and I quote it extensively in We Are City Builders. This book really, it gets into ancient Rome, and it gets into divisions in the ruling class and Bonapartism. It's a really, really great work of history. This book, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome by Michael Parenti. I would really recommend it. And there's a lot of video. Michael Parenti was an amazing speaker, an Italian-American who became a communist in the 1970s, was a political scientist, academic, and, was an anti-imperialist, and a Marxist. I believe he was on the national board of the Communist Party USA for many years. So this is Michael Parenti. And this is a clip of his that's going around of him talking about socialism. And, I do want to recognize, in terms of my political education as an anti-imperialist, etc., Michael Parenti, I owe a lot to.
Communism, ladies and gentlemen, I say it without flinching, communism in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba brought land reform and human services, a dramatic bettering of the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or never since witnessed in human history. Communism transformed desperately poor countries into societies in which everyone had adequate food, shelter, medical care, and education. To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people. But what about the democratic rights that they lost? We hear U.S. leaders talking about restoring democracy to the communist countries. But these countries, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, were not democracies before communism. Russia was a czarist autocracy. Poland was a right-wing fascist dictatorship under Pilsudski with concentration camps of its own. Albania was an Italian fascist protectorate as early as 1927. Cuba was a U.S.-sponsored dictatorship under that butcher Batista. Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were outright fascist regimes, openly allied with Nazi Germany in World War II. So what democracy are we talking about restoring? The socialist country did not take away any rights that didn't exist there in the first place.
Yeah. Michael Parenti, what makes him stand out is that he defended Marxist countries. He defended the Soviet Union. He defended he defends Cuba, defended China, and he was kind of like a Noam Chomsky in the sense that he was an academic who was a critic of U.S. foreign policy. But what separated him was the fact that he actually took, he would defend really existing socialism. And I really do enjoy his works. Super Patriotism was one of his books that I read. It was kind of a critique of neoconservative militarism. His book on Yugoslavia. He wrote a book called, I think I've got it here. I got it somewhere. To Kill a Nation, the Rational Overthrow of Yugoslavia. He wrote this book, about Bill Clinton's bombing campaign of Yugoslavia. It's a very, very good book. He was a great writer and a great intellectual. And I've drawn heavily and learned from a lot of his writing. And I would, he was 92 at the time of his passing. He was a great influence on me, etc. I really particularly admire Michael Parenti. And there's not much more to say about it. It's just, he made a great contribution. He taught anti-imperialism, and that he was somebody who, I think he comes out of Ivy League schools or whatever, and he just developed an anti-imperialist worldview. So I wanted to just throw that out there. I really do admire Michael Parenti. I wanted to talk while we're on here about a couple things, a couple more things. So the first thing, right? I wanted to share this, right? Because, when we talk about what's happening in Minneapolis and all of this, a question that comes up, somebody asked about this last night, are we heading toward fascism? Fascism is economic. And we're going to talk about that. And we need to make this point because people don't get it, right? People obscure economics, and we're going to get to that in a second. But this is kind of the rhetoric that we're getting. This is a lot of the leftists that are tailing and joining, the liberal stuff right now. They're making arguments like this about why. This is Samsara Taylor, who is a leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP of Bob Avakian. This is her argument about fascism.
All these people keep telling us it can't be fascism. How are you still allowed to protest? It can't be fascism. This is like saying it can't be cancer. I know you have a tumor and it's growing out of control, but it can't be cancer because you're not dead yet. No, the point is you recognize where it is headed and you try to stop it before it becomes too late. Catch on.
Well, here's the thing. Fascism is not a synonym for authoritarian government. There have been authoritarian governments all throughout human history that are not fascist. There were authoritarian governments before Hitler. There were authoritarian governments since then. Fascism is not a synonym for racism. There was racism long before Hitler and long before Mussolini. There's been racism since then. Fascism is the breakdown of capitalism, and it is rooted in economics. And I have written about this, and I really, if there's any book you read on it, right, there's kind of an obscure British Marxist book, right? I've actually got it up here on the shelf, and it's online. You can read it all for free. It's a really, really important book. Hold on. Right? It's called Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. You can read the whole thing online for free if you want it. You can get a cheap copy of it on Amazon. And this book goes into great detail. This was published at the time Hitler had come to power in Germany by a British communist leader, R. Palm Dutt, a man of Indian descent. And he explains what fascism is. Fascism is rooted in the problem of overproduction, right? The problem with capitalism is that capitalism is the only system in history where abundance creates poverty. And that as technological leaps go on, you have the economic breakdown. People become hungry because there is too much food. People become homeless because there are too many houses, and that abundance creates poverty. And that when you have an economic crisis in capitalism, a long-term economic crisis where there's been a great technological leap and the amount of abundance has increased, which should be a good thing in a rational economy, but in the irrational capitalist economy, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance exists. capitalism can only restart itself by destroying the amount of value, right? It has to engage in destruction. And this is what Malthusianism is, right? The Robert Thomas Malthus, the British economist, blamed the French Revolution and blamed the problems of Britain on overpopulation. And the Rockefellers formed the Neo-Malthusian Society, arguing in the time of the Great Depression that, the Great Depression was caused by overpopulation. And that fascism is an attempt to deal with the problem of overproduction by destroying productive forces, by driving down the population, decreasing the amount of value in society. And it is an attempt to stabilize capitalism by reducing the population and reducing the amount of value in society by destroying and making everyone poorer in order to stabilize capitalism. And in order to carry it out, you need a heavy-handed authoritarian state. And so they create kind of a mass movement for an authoritarian state to carry out fascist policies. Fascism is about economics. It's not fascism could be right-wing, it could be left-wing. They make it up as they go along. The point is they are using a heavy-handed state to destroy productive forces. And all capitalism is heading toward fascism because it's the only way you can resolve a crisis of overproduction in the context of not having a socialist revolution. If you're not changing towards socialism, if you're not having a planned economy, if you're going to maintain the rule of profits, the only way you can do that amid a crisis of poverty amid plenty is you have to destroy the productive forces. And that's what fascism is. And that, honestly, there's a lot of fascism on the left, on the right, and everywhere. Right? The Nazis, their fascism largely involved military spending, the creation of a military industrial complex, and rebooting the economy by preparing for war, and the creation of a slave labor underclass of concentration camp inmates who were slave laborers. Right? That's how they rebooted the economy. In Germany, they got full employment and the economy boomed for a couple of years, but the amount of value in society decreased. They also pushed women out of the workforce. They did a lot of kind of artificial measures to reduce unemployment and to stop inflation. And they, you read about it. And I quote this, my book, What is Bonapartism, goes into great detail about the economics of fascism. What is Bonapartism? Read about it. Fascism is a form of Bonapartism. It is one section of the ruling class seizing power, but then using their power to forcibly destroy the productive forces, to decrease the amount of value in society, to reduce the population in order to stabilize the capitalist system. That's what fascism is. It's economic. And if you don't talk about economics, if your analysis is limited to talking about racism or authoritarianism, you're missing the boat, right? That fascism is the natural trajectory of capitalism amid a long-term economic crisis, and that really the only way to oppose it is to demand a planned economy and to build movements of working people to demand that we have a society where the economy is organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. And that if you get caught up in thinking that fascism is being racist, or thinking that fascism is being conservative, or thinking fascism is just when the government does something authoritarianism, you're missing it. Economics is largely missing from the conversation. This is something that Dan, one of our members in LA, really appreciates. CPI, we're teaching people about economics, right? And that if you don't talk about economics, you're not going to understand what's going on, right? And that the woke left thinks fascism is when people are big and mean and scary and racist. And they're missing the boat. That yes, some of the things that Trump does, maybe they have the effect of reducing driving down the productive forces. Some of his economic policies, of austerity and privatizations, you could argue that. But a lot of what the left did, a lot of what Joe Biden did was very fascistic, right? Build Back Better was basically reducing the amount of wealth in society. They're trying to dismantle the power grid and reduce the amount of energy. And largely, a lot of the ways that fascist economic policies are implemented nowadays is in the name of ecology, right? And BlackRock is going around the world demanding that countries reduce their crop output. Joe Biden had a policy of trying to reduce the amount of food in the world and trying to reduce global crop outputs. And the Green New Deal is about reducing the amount of electricity and energy we use in America. Well, if you reduce the amount of energy, you're going to be driving down living standards. So we need to talk about economics. When we're talking about fascism, we have to talk about economics. So now on that note, I wanted to transition to talking about dissident MAGA. Right. And I have been emphasizing this on streams, and I'm going to continue emphasizing this. The most important layer of people right now are dissident MAGA. Right. It's already, I already got a question about this. Someone bought a coffee. John, saw that, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was the MAGA member of Congress, is sticking up for Alex Priddy and saying he didn't deserve to die, comparing him to January 6th. And that there's a layer of people that voted for Trump, that, are fans of Tucker Carlson, are fans of Candace Owens, that are opposing U.S. foreign policy and are mad that Trump is carrying out policies to benefit globalism and imperialism and not working families. They are the most important constituency of people in America right now. And I think they're very, very big. All over social media, they're blasting and amplifying the Trumpers that are celebrating, bombing Iran or whatever. But I don't think that represents the majority. I think the layer of Trump supporters who listen to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who like what Marjorie Taylor Greene says, is much bigger. And an example of that is this video that was circulating. Now, this video, there's a MAGA YouTube channel called the Babylon Bee. It's kind of a Christian conservative YouTube channel that is really, really pro-Israel and disgustingly pro-Israel. But sometimes they do videos that I appreciate on other levels, and it's mainly Christian-oriented videos. It's called the Babylon Bee. I mean, they're a huge YouTube channel. One of their members has his own YouTube channel, and he made this video about the divisions in the MAGA camp. Watch this. This video is going around, and he's just describing what it's like in the MAGA camp right now. And watch, this is the video.
I mean, look, I don't know what else you people want from me. I've got an American flag. It's really big, for crying out loud. Like, just stop with all the hateful comments. They used to like me. I'd say stuff and they'd just agree. I don't know what the is going on anymore. Hold on, I just need to check my tweet, make sure I got mad at the right people. This, comments, shit. Got it wrong again. Tell me what you think of this tweet. I'm all for ICE doing their job. This is what I voted for. No, that's too strong. No, what about we need border security, but this isn't the right way to do it? No, I mean, that's too weak. Okay, I think I got it. ICE was wrong. 3 shots to the face was too many. 1, maybe 2 would have been enough. No, I mean, I don't care either way. It's just, what's the position on this for us? It's hard making conservative content now. Everything you say, there's going to be a rageful mob attacking you.
What, the libs?
No, the conservatives. It's very stressful. Liberals have been leaving us alone, though. Hey, where do we stand on this take over Greenland thing? It's a wild claim. Candace says she doesn't know, but she knows. What do you think that means? I catch hell for every piece of content I make. Like, there's no winning positions you can take with these people. With my people. These, whatever they are. Okay, I think this will be a safe tweet. We should bomb Iran because the regime kills protesters. Okay, that's wrong. Delete that. We should not bomb Iran because Israel wants us to. Okay, also wrong. We should not bomb Italy? Should be a safer take. I never thought I'd live in a time where Trump supporters would hate you for supporting Trump. Well, they do. A lot of the time. Oh, dude, Dan Bongino's coming back on air. Oh, we hate Dan Bongino now? Is Erica Kirk a CIA asset? I don't know. But Candace said that Charlie came to her in a dream and told her. And I thought it was a credible source. Kind of a direct quote. Your nuanced position on Israel should come down to, do you hate Tucker Carlson or do you hate Ben Shapiro?
I call upon all nations to stop these terrorist killers. Now watch this drive.
Either way, you're not really going to win, but just pick how you feel about Israel. Let me try this. America first, Israel second. No. Israel 11th. Or America first and Israel is also America. I just don't think you can win on this one or any of them. All right, let me get this right. So if I support TPUSA, I'm potentially supporting the group that had Charlie killed. And if I don't support them, I'm turning my back on Charlie's legacy. Like, what the fuck do I do with that? There's a little bit of infighting amongst conservative commentators now. Do you know Candace Owens and Alex Jones hate each other? And Ben Shapiro hates Megyn Kelly. And if that one ever comes down to fisticuffs, my money's on Megyn Kelly for sure. Hey, Kevin, is it good or bad to be called a Zionist? I don't know. From the same tweet, people are calling me a Jew hater and a Zionist shill. I can't figure out what I did wrong. My views are way down. Like, if you make content bashing the left, everybody's fatigued on it. Not going to watch it. If you make content based on what you think, you'll be hated by half the conservatives. And the other half just won't care. No, like, this does not make me a neocon. Why would they say that? Maybe in my content, I should just start character assassinating other conservatives. Add a little something to the discourse, right? Okay, so here's what I'm going to tweet. Candace isn't actually black and she's a shill working for the CIA. Alex Jones secretly works for Israel and the IRS. And Tim Pool is Chinese. The views are up. That's good. She said Tucker's a Muslim. Have you seen a picture of Laura Loomer? I mean, do you think those are real? No, I think her face is that way on purpose for some reason. Candace has been saying a lot of things and just wondered if you knew what to make of it. If I'm following her right, then everyone was an accomplice in Charlie's death, except her. So if we're talking border security, we like Trump because he's one of us. But if we're talking the Epstein files, we hate Trump because he's one of them. Is that right? It's weird. Today, the only way to get out of the crosshairs of the angry conservatives is to be a liberal. Maybe I could become a liberal, but I'm not gay. But maybe I could try being gay. Seems like it would hurt. Might be worth it. And now she's saying Charlie was a time traveler? Well, I don't know. Are conservatives pro-time travel? I don't know. Maybe I could just try being angrier, be a better conservative. Anyway, it's getting a little dicey as a conservative commentator. Not what it used to be. Heads up on the dog poop right there.
Yeah. So that's the video. And I mean, that guy is just a regular conservative from Babylon B. And there were some digs at Candace Owens there that I felt were not necessary. But at the same time, like, that's the atmosphere among Trump supporters right now. That tells me that's who we need to be talking to, right? There is a lot of confusion. The left is completely... It's don't even go there, right? I mean, you can't, you know what I mean? The left is completely dead, right? And I can tell you over and over again how Noah and I went to the PSL, People's Conference for Palestine, and were violently removed just because we handed out the Houthi book. You know, I mean, PSL basically thinks that anyone who is not, 100% pro-abortion or anyone who would ever go to church on Sunday is a Nazi who needs to be killed. You know, I mean, you can't talk the left. The left is gone. The left is just gone. But there are all kinds of people, I mean, and I see that, I do emphasize on here that CPI, we're the only way forward. And, it's true, but there are things that are happening that are good, right? And I don't want to downplay that. Jose Vega's campaign for Congress, I mean, in the Bronx is amazing. I mean, that guy, I mean, I am excited to see what happens there. I love Jose Vega, and I'm very excited about that. The Uhuru movement and their Black is Back blueprint, and they're organizing in the Black community. Utterly amazing. They're doing great stuff too. So there are good things happening here and there. CPI, we have an understanding and a vision for how to build an anti-imperialist movement. Right now, we need to find dissident MAGA, right? And that we need to talk to dissident MAGA people, and that's really something we got to do. Now, I did want to mention there is a history of conservatives that are opposed to the Israel lobby, right? Beneath the surface, they were not as visible during the Bush years. Look, nowadays, also with podcasts, there's just a lot more information out there. But during the Bush years and earlier than that, there were always a layer of conservatives that were anti-Israel. One of those was Pat Buchanan. I remember Pat Buchanan ran for president against George W. Bush as a Reform Party candidate in the 2000 election. And this is actually Pat Buchanan, on national television as, this guy was a Nixon speechwriter, a staunch conservative commentator. This is him basically stating his position on Israel.
Said that Congress is an Israeli-occupied territory. Now, what do you mean by that?
I said on the McLaughlin Group in response to a question, Jim, they said, do you think that the Congress of the United States will resist this demand for further aid? I said, through a crack I'd heard. I said, no, the Congress of the United States is Israeli-occupied territory. What I meant by that is the most powerful lobby in Washington, which Congress can't stand up to, one of the most powerful, is certainly the pro-Israeli lobby. It has gotten its way in this town year in and year out. And I don't think the automatic votes of the Congress of the United States for $3 and $4 billion worth of aid to Israel are necessarily in the national interest of the United States. And that comment, which is to ridicule the subservience of the Congress of the United States, is perfectly valid.
Do you believe there are members of the Congress of the United States who are voting the interest of Israel over the interest of the United States?
No, I think they're voting the interest of a powerful lobby, which they can't stand up to in many cases, one of many. They cave into lobbies all over this city. I think the Congress of the United States, where it's got brave men on both sides, is an institutional coward, and that when a powerful lobby can influence or defeat them back at home and they can't get much support on the other side for a vote, many of them who will even tell you privately, I can't stand up to that kind of heat, they will vote for it.
So there you go, right? That was Pat Buchanan. Now, also, when I was a kid in Ohio, there was a member of Congress named Jim Traficant. And Youngstown, Ohio is notoriously corrupt. He was an Italian-American who was the sheriff of Youngstown, Ohio. And he was a Democrat, but he was kind of a populist Democrat. And they threw him in jail. And he went to prison for corruption. He got out of prison, and he was a Tea Party Republican during the Obama administration. And then he died in a tractor accident on his farm. But after he got out of prison, he just started talking like crazy about the Israel lobby. This was Jim Traficant, from my home state of Ohio. I remember when he went to prison when I was a kid. He was this kind of flamboyant Democrat who went to prison for corruption or bribery, and it was trumped up. It was very much a frame up or whatever. And after he got out of jail, or while he was in jail, he gave interviews from prison talking about the Israel lobby.
I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
Explain to me what you see as, why you target or why you have a grudge against the Israelis.
The grudge is not necessarily a grudge. It's an objective assessment that no one will have the courage to speak about. They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. Wolfowitz, as Undersecretary of Defense, manipulated President Bush #2 back into Iraq. They pushed definitely to try and get Bush before he left to move into Iran. We're conducting an expansionist policy of Israel, and everybody's afraid to say it. They control much of the media, they control much of the commerce of the country, and they control powerfully both bodies of the Congress. They own the Congress.
Are you an anti-Semite?
No, I'm not. That's exactly what they're going to say, and I expect that. What I am is an American. You see, I think America comes first. and we have a one-sided foreign policy in the Mideast, and we've alienated Arabs who have no way of fighting. So what they've done, and I predicted this on the House floor, is they would export violence to America, and they have. They have no other way to fight. I think President Obama knows this. I think he sees this. I think he wants to do something. I think his hands are tied. And I think he's dancing between the raindrops, trying to figure how I can politically machinate some scenario to mitigate these problems. Greta, I'm saying this. America is in danger if America doesn't take back the government without foreign interference.
Yeah, that's a great video. And you know, I am really glad to see that this is now tolerated. On the left, for the longest time, you couldn't talk that way, right? And Israel has its fingers in the left, and that's a whole nother rant I can go on. But like, Mossad and I mean, part of the reason that I'm blacklisted by the communist groups is I went to Iran in 2014 and 2015 and spoke at an anti-Israel conference. And as a result of that, Alex Reed Ross, who's a member of Democratic Socialists of America, published a hit piece against me in Haaretz, the daily newspaper of Israel. And there were 2 paragraphs about me. And those 2 paragraphs even linked. There was even a hyperlink to communist websites attacking me as a fascist. And if you look at it, like Mossad has been out to get me ever since I risked my life on a ship trying to deliver medical aid to Yemen, ever since I spoke at anti-Israel conferences in Iran. And Mossad has its finger in a lot of communist groups, right? And I mean, the fact that that CPI, CPI, the Communist Party USA never talks about anybody, right? They never talk about anybody. They do their own thing. Like David Rovics even has a song. He says the CP just does their thing and pretends the other don't exist. But they've run a hit piece on me, actually. You can go and look at the website of the Communist Party USA. I'm very proud of it, actually. There is a hit piece on me published by the Communist Party USA. I'm blown away. Nobody gets a hit piece from CPUSA. They just don't acknowledge that other leftists exist. But they published a hit piece on me. This is the work of Mossad, right? It's the work of Mossad more than anything. I'm very confident it's the work of Mossad, right? Because the Communist Party has a history of being pro-Israel, right? They don't want you to know that, right? I'm sure they don't want people to know that now, but historically, the Communist Party was a very, very pro-Israel organization. Like even, they would always say Israel has the right to exist or whatever. Any of their criticism of Israel was always predicated on this, but we love Israel. They have a history of being soft on Zionism. They actually organized the parade the day that Israel was founded, right? I mean, the big parade in 1948 to celebrate the founding of Israel was largely organized by the CPUSA. And, they've actually published a hit piece against me on their website calling me a fascist, it's worth pointing out. And that now that protesting Israel is such a big focus that a lot of leftists do, it's really hard for them to justify this. But like all that stuff you just heard from Pat Buchanan and Jim Trafficant, that wasn't allowed on the left, and it is now. But we need to move ahead with this because the reason that I've been targeted and the reason CPI has been targeted is because we are sympathizers with the people of the Middle East in their struggle against Zionism, because I've spoken at anti-Israel conferences in Iran, because I risked my life trying to deliver medical aid to Yemen, and we need to talk about this, right? And that crypto Zionism on the left and this, well, we can criticize Israel, but we see, an anti-populism is a big part of crypto Zionism. We need to call it out. So anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about for tonight. So we'll do the roll call and then I'll answer people's questions. People have sent in a number of questions and I do appreciate it. I look forward to answering them. But yeah, let's do a roll call. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? You can send your questions to Buy Me a Coffee, Caleb Maupin. Names and locations. Let's do the roll call. Who is with us? Names and locations. We got Auckland in New Zealand. Welcome. Auckland. Names and locations. We got John McCarthy in Chicago. Cameron in New Hampshire. Welcome. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Names and locations. John in Florida. Good to see you, John. We got Tom in Michigan. Good to have you, Tom. We got the South, Robert in New Jersey, JT24 in Mississippi, Oklahoma City, Jenny in Cincinnati, Jacob in Wisconsin, Marvin in New Jersey, Rose for Worldwide Peace. Good to see you. Evanston, Illinois, Chris Kruger. Kim in Ontario. Good to see you, Kim, as always. Patch in Arizona. Good to see you. Listening in Kakalaki says Harold Dogbottom. Kakalaki is slang for North or South Carolina, for those who don't know. Anthony in the Northern Rockies. Maddie in Melbourne, Australia. Ian in the Yukon. Good to see you, Ian. Good to see you. Anybody else? Names and locations. A lot of people went by. If I missed your name once, send it in again. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Master Jack in South Africa. It's a strange world we live in, Master Jack. There we go. That was a hit song in the 1960s by Jack and the Seven Jills. Penny is here in Minneapolis. She's asking about ghost cities in China, and I just don't know, Penny. I just don't know enough about it. I really don't know. I wish I could just rattle off an answer to that, but I don't know. I'm going to have to investigate. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Wow. Okay. So folks, no more wars in California. Mohican D. The Who did Master Jack. No, they didn't. They did not. It was the Jack and the Seven Jills. It was not the Who. The Who has a Baba O'Reilly and all of that. I mean, maybe they covered it. Did the Who cover it at one point? I don't know. I don't know my 60s rock and roll. Oh, we got Steven in Boston, Dave in Rochester, New York. Ghost cities were a real estate investment scam. Okay. All right. Hey there, Harold. Always a pleasure. Happy Jack. All right. Not to be confused with Master Jack. There's Happy Jack, right? Adrian in Drayton Valley, Alberta. Happy Jack sounds like a sandwich, right? That sounds like a sandwich. I'll order a Happy Jack sandwich. Doesn't that sound like a sandwich? That sounds like a sandwich. I'd like a Happy Jack. Anyway. All right. Well, listen, everybody. I'm looking forward to answering people's questions. Like I said, the best way to send questions is to buy me a coffee, which a few people have already done. So buy me a coffee questions. You can also Rumble rant me. See a couple people have done that. Caleb Moppin 22. Before we do that, we just had a great CPI event. And one of our members, Noah, he was the master of ceremonies, did a really great job with that. But he also gave a brief presentation about, our position opposing political violence and the danger of American years of lead. So I'm going to put Noah's presentation on about political violence, danger of American years of lead, etc. And then I'll start answering questions. So this is Noah speaking at our recent CPI rally in January in New Jersey.
So thank you for that. So before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to touch a little bit on something that makes CPI really special as an organization, and that is that what we offer is political clarity. We're not LARPing as a political party. We know we're not that, but we really offer something special, and that's political clarity in a time where things are very, very, very crazy. And last year, something pretty disturbing happened. I'm sure you all remember, and that is Brian Thompson, the CEO of an insurance company, was assassinated. He was murdered on the streets of New York City in cold blood. It was a political assassination. And I'm not here to defend Brian Thompson. I don't think he was a very good person, and he contributed to the suffering of thousands and thousands of people. But all of a sudden, he was killed, and the internet is flooded with all this talk of this love for the person who allegedly did it, Luigi Mangione. And he's so handsome and good-looking, and I'm not even sure that Luigi Mangione did it. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. All the pictures we've seen, I don't know. But the internet was not flooded with that. It was flooded with, he did it. And that's awesome. I love murder. And even though it was unpopular, and we wouldn't have gotten as many likes and shares and retweets if we had said, Luigi Mangione is so awesome, thank you, internet. Instead, we decided to publish a book, and we published The Danger of an American Years of Lead. And it makes an argument that used to be really, really standard on the left. It used to be something that I would think is common sense, and that's that left adventurism is bad, and terrorism is also bad, and that isolated acts of political violence are not the answer. There's actually, in the classic American novel, The Grapes of Wrath, it's one of my favorite, novel about how suffering changes people. There's a part of that talks exactly about this. And there's a farmer, and he's on his property, and somebody who's hired by the bank to foreclose on his home is basically bulldozing his home. And he comes out with his gun, and he has a conversation with the person who's about to bulldoze his home. And he says, get off my property or I'm going to shoot you. And the person who's bulldozing his home says, well, what would that solve? They would just call the sheriff. And he says, well, then I'd shoot the sheriff. And he said, okay, but then they would just hire another cop. And they go through person after person after person, all the way up to the CEO of the company, of the bank that wants to bulldoze his home. And he explains to him, well, even if you were to kill the CEO of that bank, they're just going to put somebody in who would do the exact same thing because they're being paid. That's all the system can produce. The problem is not any one individual. It's the system. There's no person who you can go out and shoot. And there is this extremely disturbing trend where the ruling class, for whatever reason, has decided that we need political violence. And it was made more and more clear with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This was just a few months ago. And I don't agree with Charlie Kirk about very much. He was right about like 1.5 issues, I would say. But he was pretty good on those 1.5 issues. But he was killed, and the memo went out to the left on the internet. And they said, we need to celebrate this. And we need to be really shrill, and we need to go on there. And this guy was just violently murdered on the internet, shot in the neck in cold blood in front of a crowd of people, in front of his wife and kids. And we need to go out there and celebrate and cheer and look like a bunch of crazy people. And then the memo got sent out to the right that said, the left is trying to kill you. And I don't blame them for being upset at the idea that half the country is trying to kill them. And this is a culture of political violence, and it's not coming from below. This is not organic, because the internet is controlled by forces who are not organic. It's controlled by the State Department. We know this. The Hillary Clinton State Department has been using regime change, using social media for regime change all around the world for years and years and years. That's coming from above. And that's because the system that we live in, the system of globalism, imperialism, is in a profound crisis. It's collapsing. It can't sustain itself any longer. We've been in a depression since like 2008, and they just can't seem to fix their system. They can't seem to adapt to AI. And there's a danger that factions within dissident MAGA, within elements of the ruling class, who may want to pull away from NATO. And that represents a huge challenge to the foreign policy establishment in the United States. And they did the very same thing in Italy, where you had the Christian Democrats and the Communist Party came together to form a coalition and decide that they wanted Italy to be a sovereign country, and they wanted to pull out of NATO. And what happened? The CIA did Operation Gladio, and they decided that they were not going to go in there with a violent US occupation like was done in Greece. That was the first instance of napalm being used on civilians. Instead, they were going to fund the Red Brigades, who were a group of communist terrorists, and they didn't say, well, we support the USA. They said, well, we're the real communists, and if you were a real communist, you would go out and you would break the legs of the Communist Party and anybody who wants to pull out of NATO. And a similar thing happened in Jamaica. They elected Michael Manley, who was sort of like a Bernie Sanders kind of figure in Jamaica, and he hired Donald Harris, actually Kamala Harris's father, who was a Marxist economist. And it looked like he was going to be friendlier to Cuba, to be friendlier to the anti-imperialist world. And what happened? They created the Shower Posse, a violent gang, to begin breaking people's legs and shooting them. And people became afraid to get political. And that's what they want to do. They want to make it so that people are afraid to be political. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about why was it that Charlie Kirk was killed, and people try and find justifications. Well, maybe it was about this and that. I'm not going to speculate, but one thing is very clear. It's that in spite of, you know, what you think about what Charlie Kirk said or believed, he was encouraging young people to get political. He was going to college campuses and having conversations with people, and there were thousands and thousands of young people in this country who looked up to Charlie and who believed that they should begin to be active, and that's something that cannot happen. They need us to fight amongst themselves so that they can rule by default. But none of the leftist groups could even say that the murder of Charlie Kirk was wrong. The Party of Sellouts and Liberals, PSL, released a statement, and they called Charlie Kirk a white supremacist, and they said he deserved to die. which I'm sure goes over really well with half the population who are terrified that you are going to kill them, say, yeah, and that person who you all looked up to, he deserved it. And you know, these people, they're not really organizers. You know, these internet fan clubs that call themselves communist parties in the United States, they're snake oil salesmen. Are folks familiar with the term snake oil salesman? Well, actually, I'm going a little bit deeper with the term snake oil salesman. A lot of people don't know where the term comes from. So snake oil is actually a part of traditional Chinese medicine. A lot of people don't know this, but the water snake in China, it produces a kind of oil that actually acts as like an anti-inflammatory. And so people would put, like when the Chinese immigrants would come to build the railroads across the United States, they would put it on their joints, and it kind of acted like it soothed them after a long day of work. So why did we get this idea that snake oil is a scam? Well, there was this guy, and his name was Clark Stanley, and he called himself the Rattlesnake King, that's not even the right kind of snake to get snake oil from. But he would do these elaborate shows, and he would go around the country, and he would say, this snake oil, it's going to cure your ills. And he would take rattlesnakes, and he would throw it in a boiling pot, and he would say, it's going to solve all your problems. This snake oil, you just need to buy it from me. It'll serve all your problems. It's a cure oil. And some muckraking journalist came along, and they revealed, this is crazy, there wasn't any snake oil. Not only did it not help anybody, but there wasn't actually any snake oil in the product that he was selling. But if you ask the average person, you guys all know snake oil is a scam. Don't buy snake oil. And it's a very similar situation because the two have become synonymous. I know that snake oil is a scam, and so if I were to come up to you and tell you, well, actually it's a part of traditional Chinese medicine and you should buy snake oil from me, you'd look at me like I'm a crazy person. I would sound ridiculous. And I say that the DSA and the PSL and all of these socialist groups that speak in the name of the red flag, that wave the red flag to oppose the red flag, I say that they're snake oil salesmen. And that to go around trying to correct people about, well, actually, socialism doesn't mean what all of these people who say they're socialists think it believes. It actually means this other thing and it's like anti-imperialism and about managing the economy. You sound like a crazy person to them because they're like, well, I just talked to Mamdani over there and he told me socialism means I get free stuff and get to be really mad at rich people. That's what that means. I mean, it means that I get to really hate Republicans and think that they're all bad people and that I'm a super duper Democrat. So why would I go around and call myself a socialist? I'm a lot smaller than a lot of those people. Those groups are very big because they're being boosted by the establishment. And that's why we at the Center for Political Innovation have had our innovationist turn. I'm an innovationist, and I'm an innovationist because I believe in economic growth. I'm an innovationist because I stand with the oppressed and the exploited all around the world, because I want a society where the last shall be first and the first shall be last, because we believe that we need a government of action that fights for working families. That is absolutely what we need right now. We need a government that will stand up to Wall Street, to the billionaires that are keeping our country poor, starting wars all around the world. That's what socialism means to me. That's what innovation means to me. And that we need to build a movement of ordinary Americans that are going to oppose this imperialist system, that are going to oppose the bankers that say, Maduro is not my enemy, Wall Street is my enemy, that says Russia is not my enemy, Wall Street is my enemy, and that it doesn't matter who's in the White House, we need to oppose this system.
Yeah, that was a great presentation from Noah, and go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's doing great videos lately. He's doing great work. So yeah, Noah is a great member of CPI, and that was a great presentation. A lot crammed into a short time. He did a great job. All right, so I'm going to start answering people's questions. Last reminder, well, I guess I'll probably remind you again, but if you want to send a question, Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send your question. You can buy me a coffee /Caleb Maupin, best way to send your question. You can also Rumble Rant me, and you can also Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. All right, here we go. So the first question came from John. And John said, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted an amazing tweet comparing the January 6th protesters to ICE and chastising both sides of the aisles about how they are letting the establishment manipulate us into fighting each other. It's a long tweet, but I think I can read it. I'm just going to read it. And thank you for sending this, John. It's a great tweet. And I just retweeted it now, and I'm just going to read it out loud. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congresswoman from Georgia. She said, I impeached Biden's Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Those were my articles of impeachment that passed in the House of Representatives. I unapologetically believe in border security and deporting criminal illegal aliens, and I support law enforcement. However, I also unapologetically support the Second Amendment. Legally carrying a firearm is not the same as brandishing a firearm. I support America's First and Fourth Amendment rights. There is nothing wrong with legally, peacefully protesting and videoing. MAGA, consider it like this. We lost our minds when we watched Biden's FBI track down and aggressively carry out home invasions and arrests of peaceful January 6ers who walked through the Capitol with open doors. Imagine if one of our MAGA independent journalists, or even just a MAGA supporter, stood on the street outside a January 6ers house while Biden's FBI carried out a law enforcement operation, home invasion, and arrest. Then Biden's FBI goes to the MAGA guy videoing it all and shoves a woman with him to the ground and sprays them with bear spray and then throws the MAGA guy to the ground, was trying to help the woman off the ground. Then Biden's FBI beat the MAGA guy on the ground, disarms the MAGA guy, and shoots him dead. What would have been our reaction? Both sides need to take off their political blinders. You are being incited into civil war, yet none of it solves any of the real problems we face. And tragically, people are dying. And I agree with that. I agree. The killing of this guy, it wasn't justified. And you know, last night I emphasized that we shouldn't join the bandwagon of hating Trump and Trump is Hitler and all of that. But at the same time, like, we don't have to support this. It's just not the best use of our resources to get involved in doing what she's also calling out. And that's why I wrote the book about the danger of an American Years of Lead. And I honestly wish more people would read this book. I have an audio book of it, but this book is really important. They're trying to manipulate us into having a civil war for their own ends. And a lot of people can see this, people on the right and the left, right? That if some kind of woke versus MAGA civil war would be a losing situation for the American working class, okay? It would be an absolute disaster. And they're trying to foment a Years of Lead kind of scenario in order to demoralize the population and maintain power. The establishment in America is very, very unpopular. And the American people are ready for a populist uprising against it. In order to prevent that, they want to wage a culture war where we cheer for each other getting murdered. And the murder of Charlie Kirk and the reaction to it, and now what's going on out in Minnesota, this is all a plot. This is not what we need. And getting wrapped up in this is not going to help us. We need a real movement, an anti-imperialist movement, educating people. That's what we need. And chasing after this and pandering to this is not what we need. And that's been my position. But I am not justifying what ICE did. It looks to me like this is wrong and it should be opposed. There we go. All right. So yeah. And so then John also says, word on the street is that Sincera Taylor is too chicken to debate you. Something about you having a deeper understanding of Bob Avakian than she does. Could be just a rumor. I guess time will tell. I will debate Sincera Taylor. I will, if she wants to. I doubt she will. I wrote my letter to Bob Avakian, which it's up for reading, and but yeah, I would debate Sincera Taylor. I would do it. I would debate Sincera. That's a good idea, actually. I think a debate between me and Sincera, and she does debates. That's one of her things. She debated with black pastors. She toured the United States after Bob Avakian wrote his book Away with All Gods. She debated many black pastors. I don't know why black pastors. She couldn't find any white pastors to debate, but it was like she was on this thing representing Bob Avakian, debating black pastors about whether God existed or not. So I would debate Sincera, right? So yeah, if she wants to debate me, yeah, that actually would be good. The details of the debate would be important, right, to work out. But yeah, if Sincera wants to have a debate with me, whether online or publicly, I would do it. I would happily do it. And one of the things I would do in the debate is defend her against the smear that they're running a cult. They're not a cult. And the cult smear against them is bullshit, right? I disagree with their political line. That's what I disagree with. I disagree with them pandering to wokeness. I disagree with their Trump derangement syndrome. But I don't think they're a cult. And the way that they've been defamed as a cult, and the way that the Cult Awareness Network has targeted them is wrong. And the way they canceled her, and that's you read my book, Letter to Bob Avakian. I start out by talking about how unfairly she was canceled, right? All she did was what the woke left says you should do. She's pro-abortion, and she went out and organized very effectively in favor of abortion. And the response was MSNBC and The Intercept and all these people running hit pieces about, oh, the RCP is a cult and it's a cult. Stay away, stay away. And I mean, that's bullshit. I spent some time around the RCP when I was like 18, 19 years old, and I learned a lot from them. I didn't agree with their political line on a lot of things, and I moved on. I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years, and now we've transcended to a new stage of innovationism. But I would not defame them the way they're being defamed. And it seems like the same forces. It's weird, even though the RCP panders endlessly to Trump derangement syndrome and they're pro-abortion and they hate Republicans, they're still widely accused of being a cult because deep down they're an illiberal organization. They have they're Marxist-Leninist Maoists, and they have Maoist beliefs. And because of that, the woke mobilization sees them as a threat. And I have said, stop pandering to people who don't want you. But, there's no reason for them to listen to me. But yeah, if she wanted to debate me, I would happily debate Samsara Taylor. Wouldn't count on it. I would assume they probably think I'm some kind of CIA op against them. The RCP is very paranoid. I spent a lot of time around the RCP, and they probably think that I'm some kind of CIA op. And also, they're trying to recruit woke people. So, debating me, like, how would that help them, right? I mean, my audience tends to be people that are not part of the mainstream woke left. So it wouldn't get them access to woke people they want to recruit. But, if Samsara Taylor would like to debate Caleb Maupin, I throw down the gauntlet. I offer the invitation, and I'm a nice guy. And she's a nice person too, by the way. And so, I respect her as a person, and I think she's been unfairly defamed, and I would debate her about politics. I would not insult her character. That's my problem. I'm too nice in debates, right? This internet debate bro culture, you're supposed to be nasty and insult people, but that's just not my style. But anyway, next question. Thank you for that, John. Will you come to Australia one day? Yes, I will find my way down under at some point, right? There's a lot of great people in Australia. David Fox and Helen Woolley and Rice from Adelaide, Australia. We have a big audience out there. I need to just come out there someday. Maybe whoever sent it, the Buy Me a Coffee was from someone. Maybe someone can help facilitate that. Because if I go, I would want to go and speak to an event. I would want to go and have important political meetings and stuff. I wouldn't want to just be a tourist, right? I mean, I might do that sometime, but if I wanted to go to Australia the way I assume this person's wanting me to come, we would want to make it a politically impactful visit. So if that's the case, let's make it happen. You can help make it happen, but I'll get there eventually. I already speak the language. I already speak English, and you all speak English out there. So yeah, Caitlin Johnstone's also in Australia. She's pretty cool. All right. Yep. I will find my way to Australia someday. And the next question is, does China allow its labor to be exploited by Western multinationals? If so, how are you able to reconcile with the fact that they are a communist nation? Thanks. Well, ACFA is the name of the person who asked the question. First of all, right, I don't adhere to the standard ML view, right? And that China's understanding of what socialism means has largely changed, right? But let's talk about, why is China not a capitalist country? They're not capitalist because profits are not in command. They have 5-year economic plans. And even private companies in China are not free to operate according to the market logic, right? Capitalism is profits in command. It is the rule of the market, whereas capitalism is abolished by centralization of the means of production, right? And that, Penny used it, a very, very important quote from Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels, where he talked about, the difference between capitalism and socialism is the difference between lightning and static electricity and, fire in the service of man, or a Voltaire arc or in a telegraph. It is harnessing the power of the market, but centralizing it rationally so it's for the good of society, right? There's a lot of misinformation out there that says that Socialism, Karl Marx spent a huge amount of his time writing about the relationship between employers and employees, right? And how the profits from production are extracted from human labor power, how it's an unfair relationship between the employer and the employee. And Marx spent a lot of time writing about it, and that Marx really believed that a socialist economy could come into existence by the labor movement. And there's a lot of people out there who reduce Marxism to that. And that's this whole worker cooperative thing, right? It drives me crazy, but Marx writes about the problem of poverty amid abundance, poverty amid plenty, and the tendency of the falling rate of profits. The worker cooperative thing doesn't address any of that, right? A lot of people think all it means to be a socialist is that you have an employee stock ownership program. The company still functions according to profits. The corporation is still trying to maximize its profits and sell its goods on the market, but the employees get a stock dividend or a share of the profits rather than a wage, and that's socialism. Well, no, it's not, because that's still production for profit. That's still the chaos of the market, the anarchy of production. Socialism is abolishing the chaos of the market and you can have a market, but the market is not in command, right? And that gets obscured, and that people that just focus on employee-employer stuff, right? They're missing the point. Marx believed that the working class would become increasingly impoverished because technology would reduce the role of the worker at the assembly line. There'd be more unemployment, there'd be lower wages, and he saw the labor movement emerging. And Marx believed that the labor movement, the working class majority, would be empowered through the labor movement to rise up and seize control of the means of production, and then centralize them to overcome the chaos of the market, the anarchy of production, so then we could have unending growth. It didn't happen that way, right? And China knows this very, very well. What happened is that capitalism in the Western countries moved into the stage of imperialism, right? Lenin talked about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism in its monopolistic stage. And he was pointing to the same thing that Henry Charles Carey, Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, pointed to when he wrote about the English system, that capitalism moved towards big corporations dominating the world and holding back economic growth and suppressing the ability of countries to develop their own economy, right? And that's what Henry Charles Carey wrote about in his pamphlet on the harmony of interests. And that's what Lenin writes about in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, is that capitalism moved to a new stage, and socialism has not come into the world as a result of the labor unions getting together and seizing their factories or seizing control of the government. Socialism has come into being largely as nations that are held down by monopolistic Western imperialism, fighting for national liberation. China, their government, right? It was not a working class government. It was a block of four classes, right? Do we have a Chinese flag I can put on the screen? When China came to power, they didn't call themselves a dictatorship of the proletariat. They called themselves a people's democratic government, a people's democracy, and their flag represents the block of four great classes. Let me put this on the screen, right? I got to get a Chinese flag. I can show it on the screen. It's fascinating, but it's important to understand, right? That the block of four classes, right? So this is the Chinese flag. All right, there we go. All right, here, let me put the Chinese flag on the screen, right? Okay, so when the Chinese Communist Party took power, right, it was fighting against Chiang Kai-shek, whose government had become kind of a stooge of the United States and was just kind of obeying the USA and the British, right? And that, he was mismanaging the economy. So the Chinese Communist Party seized power in 1949, and when they seized power, this is the flag that they made for the People's Republic of China. And this was their new flag, right? And this is still the flag of China. And what is that? So the big star represents the Communist Party, right? And the four stars represent the block of four classes. And the block of four classes were the workers, the peasants, the urban merchants, and the national bourgeoisie, the national capitalists, all under the leadership of the Communist Party that was going to create a new prosperous China free from imperialism, right? And that it was the struggle against imperialism that brought the Chinese Communist Party to power, and there were a lot of capitalists aligned with it. And then, in the 1960s, they tried to have a completely state-run economy during the Cultural Revolution. That didn't really work out too well. And then Deng Xiaoping launched the market reforms, the reform and opening up, where they brought in foreign investment, but it was all planned and controlled by the party. And that China, you don't have the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, right? You have a planned economy, and you have a state that comes out of an anti-imperialist revolution that controls the economy, right? And that's why I am an innovationist. I'm not a Marxist per se. I mean, we've transcended to a higher stage. Marxism is largely based on the understanding that we're trying to build a mass movement of factory workers that will seize control of the government and establish the dictatorship of the proletariat, and with the government, put the factories under public ownership. That's what Marx was doing, and Lenin repudiated that. And now, in the age of technology, that's even less relevant, because nowadays we don't live in an age of factory workers. We largely live in an age of a gig economy where every worker is kind of an employer, right? I have a friend who's a DoorDash driver, and one of his jobs is he has to get his car to a place where there's going to be enough orders, and then he's competing with other DoorDash drivers, and that largely we don't live in a society of like a bunch of hundreds of workers in a factory and the boss is getting rich, so they get together and they form their union, and eventually that's just not how it's happening. We're instead fighting for a government that represents the majority of the people against the imperialists and against the big monopolies, and will direct the economy. And socialist countries in our time largely do have the market, right? China has a lot of private companies, but those private companies are part of an overall plan set by the government to make sure that there's economic growth. Vietnam, their market-oriented socialist economy. Nicaragua with their micro-entrepreneurship program. Modern socialism, 21st century socialism, is a state that is against imperialism and is against the big monopolies, organizing the economy. And part of the way they organize it is they facilitate a middle class. They facilitate capitalists that are loyal to the country, that are part of the overall plan of development. That's not what Marx wrote about. I know, because the world has changed. And that's why I'm an innovationist. I'm not a socialist or a communist, because if you're still fighting for the workers to seize their factories, you're way behind, right? And if you're still trying to establish the dictatorship of the workers, it's not where we're at. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a state that will break the power of the big bankers and monopolies and organize the economy so that growth and human creativity can expand. We need a government that invests in the source of all wealth, which is human labor power and human creativity and innovation. So that's why we've entered a new stage, right? And so I see China as an example of an anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly government, as a government of action, but is that socialism as Marx meant it? Kind of, in the sense that the anarchy of production doesn't exist, kind of in the sense that there is centralization of the means of production, but it didn't come out of a proletarian worker revolution. It came out of an anti-colonial revolution that involved a block of four great classes. And part of what the revolutionary anti-imperialist government does is facilitate domestic capitalists. So we're in a different stage. And it's important to ask these questions, right? Because it's very hard. You can't really be a communist nowadays. And that's one of the dirty little secrets that no one wants to talk about. There's a lot of people who think they're communists nowadays, but they're not. Right? The Soviet Union is gone. The Soviet system is not coming back. The Soviet political orientation doesn't fit the modern world. You can't. You can say you're a communist. There's a lot of things in this world that come out of communism, right? And some of them are good and some of them are bad, right? A lot of woke leftism is they've taken the dialectical ideology that says conflict and struggle is everything. They've taken the kind of rage of the oppressed and the desire for chaos, and they don't believe in anti-imperialism. They totally don't understand Lenin and imperialism. They certainly don't understand Marx and his understanding of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They've thrown out the economics. They've thrown out imperialism, but they've taken from it the dark spiritual side of Marxism, and they've turned that into wokeness. Well, that comes from communism, right? Marx did say, if you read, Marx's essays and his personal writings, he thought fighting and conflict was the way to go, and was and that there was kind of a dark spiritual side to Marx. And a lot of the woke people, they take that and they completely reject everything else. Well, China, they take from Marx the understanding that capitalism has this problem and that you need a centralized, rationally organized economy. They take from Lenin his understanding of imperialism and the struggle of nations against imperialism, and they've developed a new synthesis, Deng Xiaoping theory. They also take from Marx the understanding that the road to an egalitarian world, right? This is a quote from Marx from the Critique of the Goethe Program. Marx made clear the only way you can have a world of equality is with abundance, right? And this is a really important quote from Marx that I just can't show enough on here, because you can't build an egalitarian society in poverty. And that's something that a lot of people don't get. Marx himself said the only way that you can have a stateless, classless world is with vast abundance, right? I'm trying to find the quote from Critique of the Goethe Program. I've shown it on here many times. I know it's here. But you cannot have equality in poverty. And that's a really, really big point that Marx made over and over and over again. And in Critique of the Goethe Program, he said that you cannot force equality. So where is the quote? Here it is. Yeah, this is the quote from Marx from Critique of the Goethe Program. In the higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished. After labor becomes not only a means of life, but life's prime want, and after the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety. And then society scribe on its banners, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. The only way you can create an equal society is if the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Labor becomes life's prime want, meaning you do it to be entertained, to not be bored. You don't have to work, right? Labor has become not only a means of life, but a form of entertainment. People are no longer alienated from their work, and they do it for fun, basically. Right? You create a world with so much wealth and abundance, yes, then everyone's pretty much equal because there's enough to go around. But as long as there is scarcity, you're going to have poverty. And the struggle of socialism is that capitalism creates the glut of overproduction. It's unstable, right? The more technology advances, the poorer people get. So you need a centrally planned economy to create vast abundance, so that human creativity no longer is held back and restrained by the irrationality of profits in command. That is a huge part of Marxism. And I learned this during the great financial crisis. I learned it from Fred Goldstein, and I learned it from Nelson Peary, and I learned it from Sam Marcy in his book, High Tech, Low Pay. I learned this stuff, right? And if you read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels, chapter 3 is all about this, about poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty, about, this is from Utopians, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, about how we need to harness the power of of industry just the same way that we harness electricity, and how all the productivity of capitalism needs to be centralized and rationally organized so that we can create vast abundance. Right. And that the basis of creating a stateless, classless world is so much wealth and abundance existing. That's what Deng Xiaoping pointed out. When Deng Xiaoping arrested the Gang of Four in China, Deng Xiaoping said, poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious, because you cannot create an egalitarian society in poverty. And that was his point. And that, so there are things from Marx that China holds on to, but they've ascended to a new plane. And so have we. And I'm not interested. I will say this. I have no interest in arguing about who's the real communist. I'm really not. Like, there are things that I'm flat out. I mean, I'm telling you, Marx and the whole worker boss thing, that's just not the basis of the movement we need right now. Right. I'm also telling you that Marx's philosophical view, the philosophical foundation of Marx, dialectical materialism, is wrong. Right. And that it's a big problem. Right. That it wears you down spiritually and emotionally. This idea that you have to fight over everything, and that conflict and fighting is the only way progress can advance. And this rejection of the spiritual aspect of humankind, reducing human beings to material, saying the only reason you think, right? Frederick Engels, in his book, I believe it was Dialectics of Nature. He said thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. Well, if that's the case, an AI machine thinks. So I guess an AI machine and a human are the same. Well, no, they're not. Humans have a soul. So they have something beyond simply thinking matter, right? No AI is ever going to be able to think the same way a human does, right? AI is an attempt to imitate thinking on the part of a human being, but AI computers will never be able to really think. They don't have a soul. There is something spiritual about what defines mankind, and that is something Marxism vehemently rejects. According to Marx, we should be able to make a brain in a laboratory. We should be able to make a computer that thinks just like us. We just develop the only reason we think is we have this piece of matter in our head called a brain, right? And with this piece of matter in our head called a brain, we think, well, actually there's more to it. There's something beyond that, right? I believe human beings have souls. We aren't just a thinking machine, right? And so there's limits to Marxism. And I'm not interested in an argument about who's the real Marxist. What I'm interested in is how can we get beyond the chaos of the market and the crisis that globalism, imperialism, and the rule of profits has gotten us into? How can we rescue our country? We need to build a mass movement to rescue America from the nightmare of imperialism in decay, right? And so we need a government of action to fight for working families. All right, so Leo Messi, and now we're doing Rumble rants. Leo Messi says, thoughts on Zimbabwe and Eritrea. Eritrea seems to be heavily demonized by the West. Zimbabwe repegged their currency to gold. Zimbabwe is an anti-imperialist government that has actually seen a lot of improvements in its living standards, over the last few years. There's now, you can see the Victoria Falls, which is one of the modern wonders of the world, and they've nationalized their diamond mines, and they're very close to China. They're very close to North Korea also. Zimbabwe is an anti-colonial government. It's funny, in the 90s, I found an old clip of Robert Mugabe being used to demonize Nelson Mandela. They were portraying Nelson Mandela as this crazy communist radical, and they said, look, Robert Mugabe used to be a communist, but then he took power, and now Zimbabwe is very peaceful. And I thought that was funny because now South Africa is much more respected, and they demonize Robert Mugabe and they demonize Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe, the land reform that they've done there has benefited a lot of African people, and China is investing there, and things have gotten better in Zimbabwe over the last few years. Now, Eritrea is an interesting case. Now, Eritrea is one of these weird cases of, at the end of the day, and this is something that is very hard for people to understand, any illiberal organization is a threat to imperialism, right? And that's not always apparent. But any illiberal movement, any illiberal organization is a threat. And there's examples of this, like recently, like, the Church of Scientology, right? The Church of Scientology, like, what in the world? There's nothing anti-imperialist about them. But, Hollywood went after them like crazy. And they're like under attack because they're an illiberal organization. They're a movement of people who are giving their whole of their lives to the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard and all of that. And the liberal order has gone after Scientology. That doesn't make Scientology good, but they are an illiberal organization, and that's considered a threat. And that the imperialists during the Cold War, they used different illiberal and in a lot of cases socialist and Marxist groups for different reasons. But at the end of the day, they're all still a threat. Any illiberal movement is a threat to imperialism, no matter what. Right. And that there might be an illiberal movement that they use to fight communists or they use to fight for imperialism at one point. But then, the group gets into a position where its illiberalism is at odds with imperialism and they become a target. Right. Hak Jahan Moon right now. I mean, the Unification Church was very much involved in the pro-imperialist fight to defeat communism. But, they are very much a threat to the liberal order, and they've been targeted in South Korea now, right? And I'm very proud to have marched in the streets to support Dr. Hak Jahan because she is an important friend of North Korea in terms of bringing foreign investment into North Korea and all of that. And, and her movement that she's built, the Unification Church, are an illiberal movement. And even though the imperialists were happy to use them against communism, they still saw them as a threat, right? And there's a lot of this, right? And this applies, and this Eritrea is a great example of that. Eritrea used to be part of Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the kingdom, the empire of Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was an African monarch who was in power in the 1930s, and Ethiopia was a Christian African nation. and Haile Selassie was the leader. And Haile Selassie was close to the British Empire and close to the Americans. And Italy was a fascist country. So Italy invaded Ethiopia and colonized Ethiopia and took over Ethiopia and Libya and Eritrea and all of that, right? You know, Italy, Italian fascism colonized it. And the communists of the world rallied to defend Haile Selassie, hands off Ethiopia. Haile Selassie went to exile in Britain, and he was living in Britain during World War II, and the Ethiopians fought the Italians. And after World War II, Haile Selassie was brought back to Ethiopia, and he was the emperor of Ethiopia. And he was a puppet of U.S. imperialism. I mean, he was just a Western imperialist. And there was this whole thing with Rastafarianism, like people in Jamaica started worshiping him and thinking he was the second coming, and that was a little strange, but that was Haile Selassie. Well, Haile Selassie was overthrown. He was the dictator, the emperor of an African nation who was pro-Western. He was overthrown by the Derg, a section of the military in Ethiopia. Was sympathetic to the Soviet Union. And Mengistu was a military leader in Ethiopia who became a communist. I think he visited the Soviet Union. He was friends with Gaddafi and other leaders. And Mengistu took power in Ethiopia. And the Derg, which was the military council, it was a pro-Soviet government. And they were trying to build socialism in Ethiopia. And the USA was obviously not a fan of this. And there was immediately a civil war in Ethiopia. And Eritrea is a region that was part of Ethiopia, that they felt they were a nation. And they had been waging a war for independence against Haile Selassie, for the independence of Eritrea. And after the Derg took power, the Derg made a deal with the leaders of the Eritrean Marxist resistance that we will grant you regional autonomy. I think they're Muslims in Eritrea, if I'm not mistaken. And that Ethiopia was a Christian nation, will allow you to have your Islam and your local practices, will grant you autonomy. So a big section of the Eritrean resistance surrendered and made a peace deal with the Derg. They were the Soviet-aligned wing. They made a deal with the Derg. The Maoists that were aligned with China, that felt that, that the Soviet Union was social imperialist, it was the Maoists in Eritrea. They didn't, and they continued fighting, and they claimed the Derg were agents of Soviet social imperialism, and that the Soviet-aligned Eritreans had sold out the revolution, and it was the Maoist communists of Eritrea got guns and weapons from the CIA and from China, and they continued fighting the Derg, and they waged a civil war against the Derg. And they were Maoist communists, but they were maintaining that the Derg were agents of the Soviet imperialists, and they got backing. Maybe they didn't know it, but they got covert support from the CIA, and Eritrea, became independent in 1993. In 1993, there was a coup, and the Derg was overthrown. Mengistu was ousted, and part of the deal was that in 1993, Eritrea became an independent country. And it was the Maoists, the Maoist communists, that took power. They're the ruling party of Eritrea. And I don't know if they're still Maoist communists or not, right? What is the ruling party of Eritrea? But they're the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, previously known as the Eritrean Liberation Front, right? Which was a Maoist group that had been funded by the CIA to break Eritrea away from Ethiopia to fight against the Derg. Well, they're in power now, and it seems like they're anti-imperialists because China was the country that had backed them, and because they had a Marxist-Leninist ideology when they started out. I don't know if they're still Marxist-Leninists. They may not be, but they are, and they apparently, even though they were getting support from the imperialists to fight the Derg and to fight Mengistu, they're in power, and it looks like they're anti-imperialists. And it's a strange situation, but that's what happened. And that even though the USA was happy to arm the Eritrean Liberation Front to fight against, they're still an illiberal group, and they're in power. And now the USA calls them the North Korea of Africa, which, that's almost an endorsement as far as I'm concerned. But they call them the North Korea of Africa, and they are Muslims. They do practice Islam, but they They are close to China, and they are anti-imperialist. And that's the point. Is the USA may have been willing to use them against the Derg, but they're still an illiberal organization. And at the end of the day, illiberal organizations, they serve themselves. They have to exist, right? And that's, you read about fourth generation warfare. And I quote this in a lot of my writing. And I talk about, fourth generation warfare and counter gangs, and like Frank Kitson and what he wrote about low intensity warfare and counter gangs, and what was written by Brzezinski and his writing and all of that, and what's been written by William S. Lind, his writing about fourth generation warfare, is that at the end of the day, non-state actors, that's what they call groups, like communist groups or religious groups, or, non-state actors are a big part of geopolitics nowadays, is organizations that are not governments, but have guns and weapons and have an ideology and have a group of people who believe in it. Non-state actors are generally illiberal organizations. People don't go out and die for nothing, right? I mean, if people are willing to form an army and die for something, it's because they have an ideology. They tend to be illiberal organizations that have guns and are non-state actors. They are useful. The imperialists will use them, but they serve their own ends. They have to keep existing. Right. And that at the end of the day, they will do what they need to do. The way the USA was able to stabilize Iraq during the surge, right? Remember the surge in Iraq? What the surge really was the USA. There were all these non-state actors in Iraq. There were all these Shia Muslim militias, right? Iraq is a majority Shia, right? Saddam Hussein was a Sunni and it was a secular government. The majority of Iraqis are Shia Muslims. And after the Iraqi government was overthrown by the United States, there were a number of Shia militias that were formed across Iraq that were Shia Muslim militias that were fighting against the United States. And some of them were very, very pro-Iran and almost controlled by Iran. And some of them didn't care at all about Iran and were just local Shia Muslims. And what the United States did was it bought off a lot of the Shia militias, or it negotiated with them. It didn't buy them off, but it made a deal with them of, you can control this area and all of that. Plus, Saudi Arabia was allowed to, fund and facilitate loads of Wahhabi fighters, all kinds of Wahhabi anti-Shia fighters going into Iraq. And those Wahhabi fighters, right, were a big threat. They killed Shia. A lot of those Wahhabi fighters believed that if you kill 7 Shia, you automatically go to heaven, right? And that, there would be mosques. I heard the stories when I was in Iran, mosques in Iraq where there's guys standing around in the back. And they asked them, why are they standing around in the back? Well, they don't have to pray anymore because they killed 7 Shia Muslim. And if you kill at least 7 Shia, you don't have to pray. You can go to heaven. You can do whatever you want because you're guaranteed to go to heaven. That's what these Wahhabis and Takfiris were teaching, right? And so Saudi Arabia was funding all kinds of crazy anti-Sunni fanatics to, anti-Shia fanatics, Wahhabis, right? And then a lot of the Shia militias, right, were fighting against Wahhabis, and Iran is their neighbor, and they were having to get support from Iran. And not all of the Shia agree with Iran. It's kind of a sliding scale. Iran is a Shia country, but there are different types of Shia. And some of the Shia really like Iran. Some of the Shia think Iran is sold out and it's not revolutionary enough. Some of the Shia think Iran is too extreme and as is a dangerous authoritarian government that's not democratic enough. There's a lot of different beliefs among Shia, but Iran is a Shia Muslim country, and there were all these Shia militias, and the CIA and the West had to deal with them. And part of the way they stabilized Iraq was bribing and buying off Shia Muslim clerics, making deals with them, and that those Shia militias, at the end of the day, Iraq was a very unstable country, and there were a lot of Shia Muslims who had guns, and the USA had to negotiate with them, and the USA had to figure it out. These are non-state actors, and that non-state actors usually have an illiberal ideology. I don't know of any liberal. I mean, you basically, if you're building a militia or a fighting force, you have to have an illiberal ideology because people have to want to die for it, right? People have to be willing to put their lives on the line to fight for it. So these are illiberal organizations, and they exist, and they're just part of the landscape. Liberalism wants to destroy all of them, right? At the end of the day, whether it's Scientology, whether it's Shia Islam, whether it's Christian fanaticism, Christian fundamentalism, whether it's communism, whether it's anarchism, whatever it is. If you're building an illiberal fighting force, right? If you have an illiberal organization, the imperialists will be happy to try and manipulate you and use you against people, whoever they're fighting. You're still a threat to them. They want liberalism. They want everyone to be an atomized individual so they can rule over us. But human beings, especially as the economy gets worse, they're going to have to form illiberal organizations to survive, to care for each other. Human beings are collective creatures in nature. And this is a weird aspect of the time we're living in, where the liberal order is basically any illiberal organization they're going to be at war with. But as illiberal organizations get attacked, they get better. And that's what's weird also, right? The more that an illiberal organization is subjected to attacks by the status quo, the more they're going to take anti-imperialist stances. They're going to take radical stances, because who are they going to align with? The power structure is attacking them, so they're going to get friendlier to people that are against the power structure, right? And so it's just kind of the natural alignment that as an illiberal organization is facing attacks, it will become friendlier to other illiberal forces. And the main force of illiberalism in the world today is the new economy, is Russia and China, is the BRICS. So, the more that illiberal organizations get attacked, the more anti-imperialist they become, and the more populist they become. The more that they champion the rights of the working people against the rich and the downtrodden, and the more connected to the rising new economy they become. And that's just kind of the game. And you have to understand everything. It's the balance of forces. A lot of things are related to the balance of forces. At the end of the day, right? Humans do have agency and can make decisions, but at the end of the day, a lot of times it's about the balance of forces, right? And that illiberal organizations have to exist. They have to serve their own ends. And so they have to make alliances based on how they can survive and who's attacking them, etc. And there's a lot. This is kind of the nature of geopolitics and geopolitical analysis. And if you read Brzezinski, or you read Dugin, or you read all of this, it's largely about the illiberal forces that exist, that are clashing with the status quo. And I don't know, this is something I could talk about for a really long time, and it's getting late, and I don't want to go on and on about that all night. But anyhow, there we go. I think that answered your question, right, about Eritrea. All right. Page 2022 of the COINTELPRO papers by Ward Churchill lists at least 10 events when police and the military killed protesters in the Vietnam era. Yeah, and that's true. A lot of people think the Kent State Massacre of 1970 was the only time protesters were shot. That's just not true. There was a number of instances where, a civil rights protest happened and the police opened fire on it. Right after Kent State, you had the massacre at Jackson State in Mississippi, but there have been a number of instances of peaceful protesters being fired on throughout American history. It's kind of a weird thing that people think Kent State, was the only one that ever happened, and it's not. And, what we're seeing in Minneapolis, it's awful. It's wrong. I condemn it. But it's not the only time that's ever happened. And was Ashley Babbitt armed? I don't think she had a gun. Right? Ashley Babbitt did not have a gun, and she was killed, right? She was killed protesting inside the U.S. Capitol, and they blew her away. And you can see the video of her being killed. It's horrendous. So yeah, you are absolutely right about that. The COINTELPRO papers, that's a great book by Ward Churchill. So I really don't like that Awaken with JP guy, but he did an excellent video on the Great Reset. Okay. I'm not going to show that. Okay. All right. Well, very, very good. Well, listen, everybody, I'm glad you're here. We're doing great stuff. Join the Center for Political Innovation. If you want to get involved in the struggle, if you want to get involved in building a movement against imperialism, join the Center for Political Innovation. We got a lot of stuff going on. We're doing great stuff. Dare to struggle, dare to win. I'm going to put on the closing music, and I'll be back probably tomorrow night. If not tomorrow night, pretty soon after that. I'm so glad to be streaming again. I took a bit of a break, but yeah, I'm glad to be back. So thank you, everybody. Let me put on the closing music, and we'll be on our way. So let me do that. And yeah, I love what I do. I love engaging with all of you. So dare to struggle, dare to win. Glad to be back. Yeah. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.